Gwlad, gwlad.
This is Wales.
We are a nation of storytellers.
Telling tales in mother tongues that create and cultivate culture.
We are shaped by our bold, beautiful land, its curving coastlines, cityscapes, and deep valleys.
We share stories of Welsh legends, passing them on to future generations.
With culture at the heart of our communities.
It looks after us and is central to our well-being.
We look after it, nurturing the land where culture grows.
We're multilingual, our rolling R's like our rolling hills.
Rydyn ni'n gyfrifol yn fyd eang. Ein iaith a diwylliant yn agor drysau mwyn gwrando ar eraill.
We are innovators.
Thinkers.
Change makers.
Leaders.
Carrying the torch for future generations.
Have a seat, don't be shy, come closer. So, hello everybody. Thank you for joining the second day of the Cultural Mobility Forum 2024. It is my great pleasure to welcome you this morning, or this afternoon, or this evening, as I know we have more than 200 participants that registered to follow this conversation online. 200 plus participants from more than 60 countries. So we are probably quite late in some part of the world or quite early in some other part of the world. My name is Johan Flock. I'm the Director of Operations at On The Move, and I'll be introducing today's discussion for visually impaired participants and online participants. I'm a white man in my mid-40s with black hair, graying hair, with facial hair, and I'm wearing a green shirt with a blue jumper. So, yesterday we heard already many interesting thoughts, and in this forum where we talk about learning, I guess we started to learn a lot of different concepts, or to learn about the situation and the circumstances of many friends and colleagues from different parts of the world. As you know, this Cultural Mobility Forum, organized by On The Move and supported by our dear colleague from Wellsouth International and the British Council, is dedicated to professional development and international mobility. For today's conversation, we will have two panel discussions with fantastic guest speakers and moderators, and we will start slowly going towards analyzing or trying to share the skills, competencies, and knowledge that we feel are important for the future. Yesterday, our discussions touched upon many key aspects of training and professional development. We talked about the frameworks and the power relations that structure our exchanges, and we discussed a lot about the influences or the perceptions and assumptions that shape our relationship to other contexts in the world. Many speakers shared their expectations and sometimes their frustrations when it comes to engaging internationally in cultural projects. But already we had very interesting ideas in terms of how to reshape or challenge the statu quo. And it feels that the role of the diasporas could be one way to shape or reshape the way we interact internationally. But also we heard that the digital space could be another way to create spaces where freely operators can exchange ideas, concepts, and knowledge. Of course, the question of resources is central, and I guess several speakers very openly shared their frustration in relation to where the funding comes from or where the funding is allocated. And in this conversation, I guess we will continue to discuss how we grow individually but also collectively. Yesterday was an interesting moment to wonder what is exactly our point of departure and what will be our point of arrival. And from the conversation, I felt that for many people in the room and probably many people online, the very idea of choosing one's destination is central and key. So to trust the artist and to trust all the cultural professionals to shape the answers, to know and develop ideas freely, and to have all the power structures trust them to know what is best for them. Well, quite a lot of interesting ideas were shared, and today, or this morning, for us, at least in the room, it is still morning, we will talk about internationalisation from the peripheries. So this first conversation will be dealing about the notion of peripheries, or how Elunet have called it yesterday, the edge. So how do you do when you work from the edge? And the notion of periphery and the notion of center are, of course, very, full of connotations, full of assumptions, full of expectations. And I guess this first panel will touch upon the perceived centers and the perceived peripheries. So how oneself, in a context and according to very specific and unique circumstances, can navigate the idea of traveling toward a center, whatever this center is. And when we talk about traveling toward a center or operating from so-called peripheries, we not only touch upon their geographies, so where do we operate from, but also what part of what community or what group we operate from. And the notion of center or the notion of norm also comes with assumptions. Who gets to travel, who gets to access international opportunities and to grow. So this morning, I'm very happy to welcome a great panel again. And I trust that our moderator, Katelijn Verstraete, will be leading an exciting conversation. Katelijn has been based in Asia, and particularly in Singapore, for many years, and she operated for different key institutions. Not only as she founded herself a great hub for artists to grow, but also worked for institutions to establish, maintain, or develop fruitful international relations with Asia. She founded her own consultancy company a few times ago called ReflAction Works, and contribute to the work of many institutions or organizations like ITM, Unique, and On the Move. Katelijn, it's my great pleasure to give you the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. Is this working? Yes. So good morning, everybody. Good evening. Good. Wherever you are, because that's what we're talking about, right, today. So thanks so much On the Move for inviting me. I have this long-standing connection with On the Move, obviously, and that's 20 plus years when On the Move was set up, when I was working at ITM with Milica and Marwane. And mobility has actually fundamental, of course, also in my own professional path. But I found it also very important to be able to enable, to create opportunities, to reflect on that, and to look at the skills development. So being here is extremely important. But also that grounding, I think, Elunet, when you mentioned that yesterday, we are actually, and yesterday night when we went to do the walk, we had quite an insightful walk around, actually inspired by the Welsh language. So it really feels that we are at the heart of the Welsh, of the center of the Welsh language space, and at the same time at the edge of, I would say, the UK, but then in a European context. So it's all these multiplicities that are playing. So thanks for that. And just to maybe self-describe for visually impaired people, I'm a 54-year-old white woman with short blonde hair and with turquoise glasses, and I'm completely in blue, but I don't feel blue. So before we enter into the topic, yes, I have two wonderful co-panelists, Marwane, Fachane. Marwane, you're based in Rabat, in Morocco, and you're the managing director of the Hiba Foundation, set up in 2006 by His Majesty King Mohammed VI, and really about developing and promoting culture and artistic field in Morocco, creative industries, education and vocational skills programs, cross-disciplinary, also very important, and you have a multi-purpose venue and the biggest recording studio in Africa. Amazing. And prior to that, you know, you build up your skills, your own skills in the Drosos Foundation in Tunisia about regional creative industries mobility programs. Yep. And then also working on a public program on youth, digital, social issues, so very broad, with the Ad Hoc Royal Commission. And you studied also in France. So nobody's perfect. Nobody's perfect. Wonderful to get your insights today on this topic. And then Kimari Spence, you are based in Belfast and coming from Jamaica, and lecturer in the Arts Management and Cultural Policy in Queen's University in Belfast, but also an adjunct lecturer in film studies in the Caribbean School of Media and Communication at the University of West Indies in Jamaica. So you're moving in between. Yeah. Research is obviously, being an academic, your thing, but especially on popular culture, right, and non-Western focus. Music industries and going very deep into the reggae and K-pop, two non-Western forms. So you worked with UNESCO on the representative list of oral and non-tangible heritage. You publish, I think the recent book was around global cultural economies. And you also on the board, you nestled yourself locally in Belfast with the MAC in Belfast, and also at Kingston Creative and Culture District. So you have both of you actually, you know, that sense of being at a center and being at the periphery, and these multiplicity you're dealing with. So yeah, today we are building further on the conversations, right? We were exploring those motivations and needs to go from A to B, meaning a geographical movement. Often informed by forced mobility. We talked about that, away from challenging political and socioeconomic context, but often and also driven by exploring new markets. Lots of people, that's what they're looking for, new practices, but also exploring yourself. And I think that came through yesterday very much to what are we actually learning when we are in the process of mobility. But that internationalization, as Johan was saying, is also happening locally. The question is more at which point in your career do you do that A and B comes together, and that you're moving in those, the communities, working often with diaspora. And that's perhaps an interesting thing that we can kind of reflect on. And what values are informing all of that? That was the second conversation. So these pathways and the directions are not always that clear, and I think as often we go as water flows, the river flows, influences, personal choices, but especially where are you, who are you, where are you born, plays actually still the most important, and the time you're born, potentially too, that having that powerful passport or having the means to be able to move, being in a country that has a policy to support people, is all actually defining, what our trajectory is. So the question is, in which peripheries or which centers are you actually? So yesterday we started to talk about that notion of periphery and the margins. We'll unpack this more, obviously. But you could say that actually it can refer to regions, that geographically, but also communities, that actually that mindset or that working with communities that are distant from the centers of power and influence and ideas and practices that are considered as less central, less normative, less, less interesting, which is, looking at the hierarchy between those spaces. So it's essentially, it's about access and participation in the cultural flow, be it interregional or global, what is, what's happening there. And when you look at the types of peripheries, it really, you can look at it through different lenses, and that's why we kind of need to the focus of our conversation here. So you can come from a very small country like me, I'm coming from Belgium. I mean, being international is a given. Or you're coming from a rural area, the opportunities might be less, depending on how you see your opportunities. You can come from a developing country where the economic situation might not be great. You can come from an indigenous community where you're being marginalized. You can come from a non-Western context where most of the references, be it in media or whatever, are from a Western context. Language minorities, and I think, you know, the place where we are at Welsh, in which way is that, you know, feeling at the margins, but also an enrichment. You know, being at the margins is a rich space to be at, or being an emerging artist. So all these things can make you feel at the periphery, but often it's about a perception, a feeling, or you're being perceived by, and that's where hierarchy, I think, comes in. So that relative sense of, you know, what is it, that dynamic in between the two, and how you're actually visible in that space. And actually what we all want as human beings is to be visible and to be recognized and to be relevant in the context that we are in. And in a global digital context, that's not that easy. But it's all changing quite rapidly, you know, the spaces in many ways. In good and bad ways, I would say. I mean, driven by wars of displacement, but also driven by movements like the BLM and looking at decolonization as a space. So that dynamic has a big influence on mobility. Yesterday we talked a little bit of the South-South, but we also started to talk about that innovation and the experimentation that is happening. And I was struck also, you know, when you said it's actually also about kind of a mindset and why would we learn certain things from certain people? Is it relevant for us, and what do we have to offer? So let's just go deep into it now, and look at that space between the peripheries and the centers, in the peripheries, and what it means for people, culture workers like us, in our trajectory, what knowledge and skills we need. So Marwane and Kim, so you've, as I said, you've both worked in peripheries and centers. I think my first question is, you know, what does it actually mean to you? You know, what does periphery and center mean in your context that you're in right now, and at your age, I guess, too? Sorry.
Sorry. My age. Well, good morning, everyone.
And could you self-describe
Yes,
yourself?
of course.
Yes, yeah.
That's going to be a funny one regarding the age.
Well.
My name is Marwane. I'm from Rabat, Morocco. I'm actually a decade older than On The Move. That would be early 30s. I'm wearing blue pants, a maroon, right? A maroon sweater over a white shirt. I have facial hair and black hair, and I'm Moroccan, so imagine an Arab guy with a microphone on the cheek. Yeah, well, when reflecting as our discussions, our long discussions, led us to, when reflecting on the center and the periphery, I come to accepting that the center and the periphery keep changing depending on where you are or where you are at the stages of your life, especially in the cultural sector. We can address the center and the periphery in the geographic term, and then if you're circular, the center would be the center of the circle and then the periphery would be around. But then we can also address it in terms of attention. If the attention of human beings all around the world are directed to a certain space or a certain activity or a certain population or festival or whatever, then the center is not geographic, it's where everybody's looking or what everybody's thinking about. So my idea of center and periphery have never been static. I've always addressed that idea of center and periphery depending on what we're talking about. And when at the foundation we have this conversation with the artists of what is the center and what is the periphery, I kind of refuse to see the developed countries as the center and then us developing countries or less developed countries as the periphery, because sometimes the interest is elsewhere. For example, you mentioned the Open Up Mobility Fund that I had the chance to work on the South to South region. That was a fund that funds artists to be mobile and to move from Morocco to Lebanon across the countries in between, and that would be Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, Jordan, Palestine, and Lebanon. And then no North country was mentioned in that, and then the center has never been in the North. It was just moving up south to south for the artists. Then the center would be questioned Is it up north, or is it just in between these countries? So the periphery also, sometimes, let's just take Morocco as an example, the periphery, the center would be the capital of Morocco, as in any other capital of any other country in the world. And then the periphery would be those rural villages or those rural areas around it. Let's say, I don't know, London and Caernarfon. And I think my pronunciation of Caernarfon has really, really improved. Caernarfon. So, for example, for now, the center is Caernarfon. Caernarfon is holding the International Mobility Forum. While I don't know what's happening in London, but for us, what's important is the International Mobility Forum being held in Caernarfon. So yeah, I think as a first intervention, what I would like you to understand from this is that for me, the center and the periphery can change every day, every second, every hour, can change between two meetings, because for one meeting, we're talking about going to a festival in the US, in Canada, or in Brazil, and then in the next meeting, I would be talking to my team about social, creative enterprises that were helping in Fez, in Tangier, and then keeping an open mind about where's the center and where's the periphery opens new doors of development, because then, if for example, I'm thinking about the cinema sector in Morocco, the center would be Ouarzazate. I don't know if you know where Ouarzazate is, but it's like the city you would visit as tourists. It's in the southeast desert, camels, dunes, blah, blah, blah. But then there is a whole value chain of cinema in Ouarzazate, biggest studios of recording, schools to teach cinema, funds for movie making. So we don't care about cinema in Rabat, Tangiers, or Casablanca, or Marrakesh. But then when you think cinema in Morocco, your mind would be, oh, what is that? The center of attention. So yeah, let's maybe wave away the geography of center and periphery and use it more in an intellectual way of where do the attention goes, when, and about what.
Thank you. It's about that connection to static versus dynamic, and what is important to us. But I'm kind of interested also how you look at this, Kimari. That multiplicity of views around center periphery.
So I'm let me self-describe. I am black woman with dreadlocks, black glasses, black lipstick, black dress, and multicolored collar, and what else should I say? And black Doc Martens. Yes. So free shout out to Doc Martens. So for me, I agree with Marwane and I disagree. So I agree in terms of the kinds of innovation happening and the import. Once something is centered somewhere, the fluidity of one's attention and mindset. But that said, I think I'm more of a skeptic. I see power relations everywhere, and I think by virtue of just growing up on a tiny island in the middle of a sea, coming from Jamaica, it depends on what we're talking about. So if we're talking about center and periphery in terms of power and money and resources, unfortunately, that hasn't changed as much as we would like. Resources are still more or less in terms of the greatest amount, agglomeration of resources. They're still in the global north, and it's sad to hear, and people might feel guilty, whatever, but it is what it is, right? But center and periphery doesn't mean that also all centers are created equally, and particularly all peripheries are created equally. So I'm from Jamaica, and so in a lot of ways, due to the history of colonization, slavery, IMF, etc., the center is London or New York or DC, depending on who's the president. But Jamaica in the Caribbean is also a center. So, you know, I make jokes about, you know, I'll talk to my Jamaican friends and be like, yeah, you hear about the election in St. Lucia? St. Lucia is another Caribbean island. And I'll have friends look at me, I don't really follow small islands. And I'm like, looking like, aren't we on a small island? I don't want to. So, you know, in the Caribbean, Jamaica is a center. You know, so when people, a lot of times when people talk about the Caribbean, when you read it, you're like, I think they mean Jamaica. Right? And then you think of centers where, in terms of language, so for people in the UK, when they say Caribbean, they mean English-speaking Caribbean. For Caribbean people, there are 4 Caribbeans. And because of the language and also the way things are still structured. So I was describing to someone yesterday how, you know, when I used to be head of creative industry in the Jamaican government, there is a festival in Guadeloupe I have to go to. But all the roots are still on colonial things. You know, British Airways only goes to English-speaking islands, etc. So I would have to get on the plane, go to the Dutch, because the Dutch don't have as many airlines, so they rely on the Americans in the Caribbean. And then go to there's a Dutch island that's split between the French. Go to the Dutch side, then get in a taxi, drive to the French side so I can tap into the French routes. That's even though this island is right there, right? So all that so when you talk about center and periphery, if we're talking about power and attention, there's still, in the center, it looks kind of the same, but there are regional differences. But when we're talking about innovation now, and unfortunately, that's not a new thing, I will say. You know, innovation has always happened in the peripheries of the peripheries of the peripheries, right? Because, you know, I'm in Belfast, and the conversation there is that we're Belfast, in a lot of ways, like Jamaica, culturally rich, vibrant place, but it's the periphery of the UK. I mean, we talk about the other island, and you know, we literally have to get on a plane just to go to the other island. But then they're also very aware that most people tend to have Irish and British passports that are powerful. So we might not have funding resources, but we can physically move faster. While me, as a Jamaican in Belfast, I need a visa just to go to Dublin. So, you know, and then the innovations that happen on the center. So actually in my dual position, etc., one of the things, I study popular cultural industry. So I'm less at the, in practice, I'm at the grassroots, and in research, I'm at the, you know, front page of the Billboard magazine ends. So it's 2 different ends of things. And it's interesting to me to, you know, when you're thinking about innovation, etc., the innovation, there is necessity innovation that just happens because a lot of the new things like digital innovations happens at the center. So for Spotify, so I always use Spotify, you know, South Korea has money. So for K-pop, you know, but Spotify didn't get there till 2021, so they had to create their own platforms, Neva, etc. And so Spotify is fighting for its life in Korea because they already created new platforms to deal with, you know, they weren't like, oh, please come to us. To deal with the lack of attention, they innovated. Jamaica also innovated, but didn't have the resources to create new platforms. So the innovation in the reggae industry was to have digital boutiques that would create a whole persona, a digital persona for artists in a whole other country. So US, UK, Canada, wherever. And so Spotify comes to Jamaica and everybody's like, oh, but we're already on Spotify. They're like, but we're not here. Yeah, we made that happen. So that kind of innovation, etc. But there's still, there's also the discussion of how do we go south to south in our own regions, like Marwane was talking about. But yeah, as I said, I agree with Marwane on the kinds of differences in center and peripheries in determining what you're talking about. But I think it's important, especially in this conversation, to realize just how embedded and entrenched power and old school colonial structures are. Like, I want to be, hopeful, let's all, hug each other. But the reality is, for some of us in this room, the reality of those power structures impact on our day-to-day existence, despite the fact that we've innovated them into daily insignificance, but they're still there.
Yeah, I mean, the conditions essentially.
Yeah.
Talk about the conditions, the macro and the
Yeah.
micro conditions, and what actually is important. But I just was wondering, I mean, we talked the other day about
many things.
What shifts are coming about by, for example, big initiatives that are taking place.
Yeah.
For example, we talked about football again. But it's an interesting thing, with Morocco now, right?
Maybe it's a faraway example from the cultural industry section. Yeah, we did and linked through the ceremonies. But for example, in terms of football is big in Morocco. Like you'd find any 8-year-old to 16-year-old playing with a ball in the street with 2 rocks marking the goal, and then they just run in, closing the street, and then when a car would pass by, they would just go on the side and then come back to the field. Let's say that. Morocco's performance in the World Cup was kind of impressive. Some people didn't even know where Morocco was on the map until Morocco was in the semifinals. Like, what? Who?
Where?
A red flag? What's that? And then, I kind of enjoy going behind the screen and looking up. And Morocco rocketed the Google searches for a few weeks. Everybody was looking at Morocco, trips to Morocco, how much the flight costs to Morocco, and what's the currency in Morocco? Anyways, so that performance put a country on the map, and then it was followed by Morocco's organizing the World Cup in 2030 with Spain and Portugal. So these kind of follow-up events, and that's why we talked about football, because in terms of context, when many things from different elements are happening at the same time, it even fosters and strengthens the idea of center in our countries. Let's say France in Africa today is not so good looking. Political situation is, I really do hate talking about politics, but I'm just gonna cite it. So politically, the situation between France and some French-speaking African countries is complicated. And then on the side, Morocco is really on top in terms of football and hosting the World Cup in 2030 with Spain and Portugal, and is kind of the closest country in terms of, if you don't know that, now you know, it's the closest country to the European continent. It's 14 kilometers between the Moroccan border and the Spanish border. So it's really, at the same time, the center of attention for football, one of the most stable countries politically in the region. It's a kingdom and it's constitutional monarchy. And France is investing massively in the country because they see it as a bridge to a continent that is not talking to France anymore because of colonial history and stuff like that. So the World Cup, the performance in football, the political situation around Morocco, you can say that Moroccan people did nothing in terms of, they did not invest anything in this. But now it's a result because the context all around the country puts it in the center of the map in this region. Layering back on something that I really forgot to mention and that Kim-Marie mentioned, let's divide the center into regional and then global center. For example, in that North African region, the center can be Morocco. Well, it's up for debate. But then what's really funny is that same idea as, we don't talk about small islands. When I was in this ad hoc royal commission that worked on Morocco's development model, we worked on international relations and influence. And I do remember this conversation with top-notch people saying like, okay, let's talk about the relation between Morocco and Europe, and then Morocco and Africa, and then Morocco and the Arab countries, that's like on our right, because Morocco is far on the west. And they were like, no, we don't talk about Arab countries. We are an Arab country. And we're neighbors with Arab countries, and like, they do nothing interesting. Yeah. We don't talk about small islands. It's kind of the same. And it's really, curiously enough, we have this inability to look at our peers. We only look at what we consider being the El Dorado of development, being the center of power, money. We cannot think about peer-to-peer learning or peer-to-peer capacity building and then peer-to-peer international influence or whatever, but we always look up to whatever we consider up. Mentioned to that very funny movie of Meryl Streep, Don't Look Up. Yeah, some of you watched it. Yeah, so this, reflecting back, let's accept this humility of knowing where we are, our level, accepting also those models that you challenged of, I honestly accepted them, of media power, where the centers of media are, and the shift of conversation and the storytelling that whoever wants to put out there. Let's accept that the money, the power is somewhere because of whatever history, but let's also build innovative models that do not contrast with the existing models, but rather go around them. And that's what works for our countries. We can never imagine that we have the capacity to go straight ahead and challenge, let's say, a nuclear power or big political or media power, but we can also think about around. Closing on the idea that I could have never said this kind of statement prior to COVID, prior to the pandemic. But then when COVID hit, the most developed countries were not the ones who had the best response to the pandemic. And then, for the cultural sector, because you mentioned Spotify discovered what is supporting artists in the music industry. And they discovered that a Moroccan rapper called El Grande Toto makes more money than a French rapper because everybody in the Arab-speaking countries listens to Grande Toto and he expresses their social sufferance and can make a shit load of money playing in those. Yeah, I don't know what words I can use. And we agreed that certain words are out of use.
Yes.
So, in the pandemic, the money model completely changed for our countries. During the pandemic, digital monetization became the major way for artists in our region to make money because people listen to music in their homes, because the live music stopped, festivals stopped, and Spotify and platforms like that. Now we even have a director of Spotify operations based in Dubai working on the full region. Spotify today has a playlist, the top 100 listened to in the Arab countries, that are produced by Spotify, which never happened, Spotify never looked at our countries prior to COVID. So, and this is a model that no economist studied before. Nobody imagined that the music industry could go mainstreamly on the digital platform. What artists make today out of money is impressively much more than what they do make on the live model. On the anecdote side, and this is the end, because of the digitalization of the music industry, some artists, I discovered, sadly enough, cannot perform live. They can just do they are really famous on the platforms, but then when you invite them on stage with a microphone, they really, I'm really sure some of you on karaoke can perform better.
I saw you nodding a lot.
No.
Yeah.
So, just because I know I started with a very door note, but I just felt I had to say it. But in terms of the innovation and, what Marwane's talking about, the learning and the innovation that has always happened to go around obstacles, but also just innovation in and of themselves. So in our discussion yesterday, and Kate's doing a great job of herding cats, Marwane and I. But in terms of innovation, one of the things we were talking about are the things that happen in our various countries that can't happen in the global centers, for example. So one, just the COVID was a particularly interesting one. I remember when COVID hit, I was in Southampton, so in England, and people were like, what do we do, whatever. I mean, the day the UK closed, the next day, Jamaica had already transitioned to online parties, right? So they were already like online sound system battles, because they realized we could do these international reggae sound system battles online. And that was the next day already. I mean, the disadvantage of being in England was if you were in Jamaica, they had already had the linkage with bars, so I could have ordered like a bucket of margaritas sent to my house. So I was in England like, why are we so behind?
Where are the drinks?
Yeah, like, I mean, the kind of response, and it took till Notting Hill Carnival, which was the summer, for like me to see that kind of innovation happening in England. So, because people, we bandy around this term resilience, and in the global cultural economy, innovation is also another term for resilience. You meet a problem and you know how to do it. When you come from certain places, that's like how you have to work. In terms of the global culture, some of the things I noted, like, I study K-pop, reggae, and also had done fieldwork on Bollywood, K-drama, and one of the enduring things was just how people are just used to work. So we were talking about how if I have an event to plan, I kind of look for like Jamaican people. Why Jamaican people? Is it just, Kim only supports Jamaicans? Of course I support my people, but it's also the fact that Jamaicans are used to not having venues. We don't have anything like this in the country, and this is a small. But I'm like, no, right? We don't have it. So Jamaicans are used to creating venues out of parking lots, roadsides, whatever. You're like, yeah, I need this to be like a posh runway event in 2 hours. Done. And so those are some but in the center periphery argument, as much as I talk about the center of money and power, it's also assumed that innovation and knowledge is at the center. And I'm like, those are not the same things.
Yeah.
Yes, I will agree with the money and power,
Yes.
and it's changing in terms of the attention, but the innovation, come on, even when you think about, even South Korea is a different kind of periphery, because, we all know, South Korea is not a poor country, put it mildly. Well, no longer, because that's only 3 decades ago. In 1997, they were in hock to the IMF.
That's an interesting topic, actually, South Korea, right? Because it's all the different conditions coming together.
Right.
There's also
Yeah,
money there.
but even then, more resources to kind of, their innovation might mimic it, but they're also innovating, like, all right, we can't. So, for example, in K-pop, and I'm using it, by virtue of racial, okay, we don't listen to the non-English speaking people of the Asian sex star, like hot boys. No, you don't look like Liam Hemsworth. Like, I can't. So using YouTube as the way, make it, and YouTube is the way that they've so there was a whole New York Times article that had come out about how nowhere was this thing advertised, like on the main radio. It wasn't on the Billboard charts, nothing. And they just sold out a whole stadium. They're like, how? Because they realized, all right, we're not the gatekeepers of top 100 radio, etc. So we just go, we're going to just put it up on YouTube. We're going to use social media, etc. And that's how it happened. In the era of reggae, when reggae was starting, Bob Marley was almost like, for those who know anything about the Bible, John the Baptist, spreading Rastafari, reggae, and Jamaica everywhere. And so there's a whole reggae scene that happens through festivals, etc., all over the world. And I know this because I still have a map in my office of reggae diaspora points. And there's only Antarctica there isn't a reggae festival, but we'll wait for it. But
penguins.
Yeah, no, the penguins might rock it up. But you know, and that exists and innovates, etc. Even though when you look at the charts, it doesn't track. So you know, there are all these other spaces and knowledge. So the learning is assumed, and in terms of some of the funding models that have been talked about, it's assumed that the learning is coming from the center. And I'm like, really? Because I mean, how many? One of the reasons I went to do my PhD was that went back to school and became an academic was because I was sitting as a head of creative industries, and to get certain funds, etc., you also have to get the consultants, etc., and you have to be nice because you can't be like the unruly natives that don't listen when people are trying to help. But on the other hand, you're like, this is not Sweden. No, but so you literally have to be teaching the people who are sent to help you about your context. And I was like, you know what, I could do this myself. Let me just go and become the doctor, and I will do this, And so that was and it's not to say some of the consultants were amazing. So I'm not knocking it, but a lot assume that because it works in Sweden, it should work in Kingston. I'm like, dude, Kingston is a whole other beast. Yeah. Whole other cultural policy infrastructure, whole other resources, a more collective approach. So every artist you see has a collective around them. Yes, they like their friends, but also they realize there's no public funding structure. So around them, they have like a whole incubator system set up around them. Taylor Swift doesn't have 5 artists around her that she's trying to make it, but that's almost like the standard model because there are no major labels, etc. So every artist does this themselves.
But that's the main
what
issue,
I'm saying?
right?
Yeah.
When the periphery is really trying to build a model that is like the center. When the periphery doesn't accept that maybe
the center doesn't know about the new
other
model.
ways of doing exactly. There are other ways of doing that same thing. Maybe let's not make the whole world as a one size doesn't fit all. Let's accept this.
I mean, you mentioned about Netflix also. I mean, the approach Netflix took actually had existed already somewhere else,
existed, right? Because in Nollywood, they're like, all right, we had the DVD distribution, and but that's physical, but you have a whole diaspora, and they wanted to see it as well, and then also throughout the continent. So Iraqi comes up and buys these rights, and rights are only valuable if someone wants them. So they were cheap at first. They're not so cheap anymore. And they just populated the platform. And even, so Iraqi kind of looks like Netflix for African film content, but it's different how you can pay, because they realize not everybody is banked, so you have mobile payments. Yeah. You can also buy a one movie subscription. You can buy a language group, because I only want to watch films from Ghana, etc. And there are similar platforms for Indian movies. So Bollywood is just only the Hindi film industry. Yeah. There's a Telugu film industry, Bengali, etc., etc. And you can, and the last one was Enthusiast, and there are probably more. And that model of, that we will distribute and do this itself. Reggae has like, in the era of cassettes, we had like the guys that sold cassettes on the road. So I wrote a whole paper about this. I know way too much about the cassette ninjas, which is what they're called. The cassette ninjas. And they would literally have an informal network throughout the UK, US, Canada, wherever. And they'd supply. So I remember when I worked at UNESCO, I'm like, a dance happened in Jamaica the weekend before. And by the next weekend, it was in the corner shop. Because they were like, the DVDs came from Jamaica, because someone had because they realized none of the Hollywoods are interested in, but that doesn't mean we're just going to stay in our place. We have diasporas.
But it's about relevance too, isn't it?
Yeah. And I wanted to note one other thing with the diaspora connection, which might be interesting. I talked about diaspora as an audience, but also diaspora as you know, a means of funneling things. So for Kingston Creative, and it's cropped up in Bollywood, but let me go to a Jamaica, Kingston Creative example. We got a fund from, we got a grant from the Open Society Foundation, right? But you have to have like a charity status that doesn't exist, and we would have to be too. So we knew there were all these diaspora organizations, because, you know, I mean, if you've been familiar with Jamaicans, everywhere we go, we form an association. We try to brainwash everybody into Jamaicanness, really. It's a superpower. But, you know, we contacted one of the larger diaspora associations in New York who had the status. And so we negotiated with Open Society Foundation to fund that organization. Yeah, and then, but it was for a Caribbean program, so the 4 Caribbeans, there's no bank that exists in the 4 Caribbean. So then we had to negotiate with Western Union, because Western Union is everywhere you want to be. And Western Union could get funds all through the region. The diaspora funds families, like, you know, people work and send back to families, etc. So Western Union, so diaspora organization and Western Union was the bank. We had to negotiate with them. And OSF was like, what? Why not a bank? Which bank? We don't even have one bank for the whole English-speaking. Like, you assume their structures, they don't talk to each other. But Western Union will get your money anywhere, I swear. Look, and I don't work for Western Union, and I will note, I don't work for them.
I mean, what I'm hearing is a profound... What I'm hearing is a profound entrepreneurship, actually.
Yeah.
Coming from a real drive to do things and to express yourself and to have that diversity.
But there's a respect on both sides. I respect that innovation. Yeah. You know, like, not just, oh, why can't it? Respect that this is a way to, a valid and probably sometimes better way to do things.
We actually expect to surpass the problem. You don't see a problem and stop. You expect that someone, somewhere, will innovate in a way to solve it. I don't know how to explain it, but it's in terms of mindset. You don't see a fund problem or a legal problem or a structural problem as a problem. You just ask your Moroccan buddy, do you know someone who can do something?
Like, that informality,
that level of informality, honestly, it's what works. But, let's just go back a few minutes to mobility, as it's an International Mobility Forum. So at the foundation, in terms of when talking about the periphery, I received this request for an internship. That's where, as far as, I received this request for an internship for a student at the Fine Arts University in the north of Morocco. Pretty good profile. Then we go to the interview, it's remotely, and I ask, what did you think about this particular exhibition at the National Museum of Fine Arts, blah, blah, blah. And then I hear, I have never been to the National Museum of Fine Arts. Okay? Master's degree in Fine Arts, who has never been to the National Museum of Fine Arts. For me, it's like kind of a doctor who has never been to doctor school. Doctor school. I'm 8 years old. Anyways, so, and I say, why? And then this sentence is the reason why we started the ASFAR Fund for local mobility in Morocco. The school didn't have in their curricula anything that planned a visit to a fine arts museum or a museum other than in the same city. And then it got even bigger when I discovered that many local artists refused to do gigs in other cities. I'm just talking about within Morocco, because wherever they're invited doesn't cover their travel expenses or their hotel expenses or their per diem. So it's something like 20,000 euros between the foundation and an international partner. And we launched the first calls, and we say we're going to fund 2 streams. The first one would be students in the arts and cultural sector who need to move either to discover a museum or to go, I don't know, do a photography residency in the Sahara, or just be a volunteer in a festival and observe how a festival works behind the curtain, stuff like that. And then for all artists who already have a gig or a residency or something that proves, we launch the first call for application and nobody applies. Nobody applies. Because in terms of mindset, it's a new model. Nobody expected someone to pay for your taxi or your train ride that costs €4 from Tangier to Rabat. Nobody expected that I would pay for your hotel, because the global, the average amount was around, because we closed the first edition last year, and now we're launching the second one, but the average amount was around 50 to 60 euros, including per diem, transport, and accommodation. That's in terms of mindset, nobody in Morocco thought, oh, the Hiba Foundation will cover that without asking for anything in return except 3 answers to 3 simple questions when you go back after the mobility. But then what we did, and this is kind of just a reflection back, if any one of you wants to launch a regional or local mobility fund, I went on and I called all the festival directors and all the venue directors. That was like 2 weeks of calls on my phone. And then all the residency organizers, and I said, for all your people accepted, or all your artists invited, or all your students at the universities who want to move, if you get them accepted, send me the list of acceptance, and I will cover whatever costs you do not cover. I will just ask them to fill a form, and then we managed something like 600 fund for mobility in local Morocco. For some of you who know Visa for Music, so the foundation organizes Visa for Music. It's a professional music market for African and North and Middle Eastern music professionals. The ASFAR fund, ASFAR means travel, trips, but it rhymes with art, so ASFART, funded all the Moroccan musicians who came to Visa, not only to play on stage, but also to meet all the professionals. So periphery to periphery also works. It's not necessarily periphery to center. It's also, how can I be mobile in my own periphery, in my own regional, non-developed, segregated, alone in this small island place? Know that the struggle is real, and people do not also need to book a plane to go. And then on the informal channel.
But it's an interesting thing you say for that person who studied, who had actually not even maybe thought about going to see that museum. So what is the pathway of people, you know, in terms of their own career development, personal development?
Well, that's a really...
when you come in when you are in the periphery, you know, the periphery being reference Rabat, potentially, you know, what is that? From your work now, how do you see that trajectory, and where even does the international come in?
No, absolutely not. You only know what you're told.
Yeah, no, and you know, even in this, like we had to structure this whole value chain, and because I remember Kate had asked us about, you know, what about the value chain, and again, you know, you have to go from where you are, and then in your country. So Morocco is bigger than my country, but yeah, okay. So for us, it's like 2 cities, and then Jamaica is over. But you know, even getting in the rest of the region. So even going back to the point about like big events, right? So we've had this thing of it's all islands in the Caribbean. So you literally need to get on a plane or a ferry to go to another island, etc. And one of the things was just free travel. So with the different passports, and a European can travel much easier, EU citizen can travel much easier through the Caribbean than I can. And it's Cricket World Cup in like the early 2000s that kind of opened it up, because we had to find a way for people to be able to move between islands fast, and then we just never went back, thank God, right? So at least you can travel through the region easily visa-wise. Again, we come back to plane routes. It's way easy. So I was, you know, in this whole thing of like visas, etc. The easiest way for me to travel through the Caribbean region is to have an American visa, because I need to go through Miami. That's the fastest way, right? It once, I remember stopping in Miami after 5 years of just transiting, and they put me in a little room because they couldn't understand, you never stop. Why are you stopping here now? But, you know, and just that, so even through the region, one of the reasons people also don't respect the regional aspect is also it's easier to go north in some but right, but then you think about places like India similarly, visa-wise. For Bollywood, it's easier for them to go to London than to go to that region because of jobs. So there's some of these structural issues as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I do want to be, we talked a lot about music and actually
Yes,
digital. I mean, coming from your background. But I was actually going to backtrack a little bit about that because I think COVID was a catalyst,
was a game changer
in many directions. You know, what actually of these innovations states and how did they count for other kind of art forms? You know, what is it that the digital space can do for people to develop their skills, go internationally and so on?
I like how the conversation, so yesterday morning when we talked about, you know, traveling, print, carbon print, etc.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go there now. So, I like how the conversation about digital today. I was in Abidjan for the Massa, and I heard that some people didn't get the visa to come to Ivory Coast. This is funny. European people didn't get the visa to be in Ivory Coast for the Massa, and this was the first time I hear about this when an artist cannot present. Let's say a theater piece, because they didn't get the visa, they would send the script to other comedians and it would be played in a non-presence way. I don't know if you know this concept, but it's a rather interesting new one. So the digital era is really being, let's say, pushed very hard on the artists cross-sector and asking them to reduce their carbon print, let's not take planes, you travel with a big guitar and a big amplifier, can't you just send your track, blah, blah, blah. But I just want to say, we haven't been traveling that much. We haven't been traveling that much.
It's not our footprint.
It's not our carbon footprint, it's yours. Can you not travel and can we travel more? I mean,
yeah.
Let's reflect back on history. Who did that hole in the sky? That wasn't our planes.
No.
Our airline companies have less than 60 years old.
And I will note we said this more colorfully yesterday.
Yes.
Far more colorfully. But yeah, no, we were just where are we?
Exactly.
And I will add another point, a point that we've talked about innovation, we'll add the livelihood part. So it's said like, environmentally you shouldn't travel, you should send your script. So, but what does that mean in terms of the payment? Because one of the reasons for traveling isn't, all right, I want to see the world, whatever. It's the reality that especially in some, like you cannot earn in that market to support yourself. Exactly. It's not a space that. So, for example, reggae artists. I know.
Artists, reggae.
Yeah, but you know that a lot of reggae and dancehall artists perform in the region because they love to perform. This is an audience that holds them to a high standard, which is why you like the music. You know, like we're used to good music, etc. But can we pay them? So you know. And then in the region, there's a ceiling. So of course, they're paying them in the region, but what you can pay for livelihood because frankly, lack of respect for creative artists, etc., we haven't paid them in the way they can live. So when you say, you can't travel, then how do I earn? I remember giving an example of like, a COVID innovation where you had the artists in Jamaica. So you remember I played the artists in Jamaica, and then they were collaborating with artists in London for the BBC, and so they booked out a hall and they like projected the art simultaneously, and they were playing simultaneously, and I was struck, but also the first question that came from Marwane was, did he get paid the same? I'm like, right. No, he was an artist that had the management team that made sure that he got paid the same rate as if he was in London. But a lot of time, this whole, yes, this whole notion of footprint also means that, oh, I don't have to pay you. Like, so you have used this playwright
I'm
script.
bringing you to Europe.
But then, no, you must pay them because he didn't actually come. And I'm like, no, if we're going to do this right, then it means then that I'm not supportive of it. I agree with you on the carbon footprint. But say we're playing along with this. Then you need to pay the same. It needs to also mean that the remuneration has to, so the livelihood has, right, and the power relations
the equitable, at which points. So I think that's, you're bringing up a lot. I'm looking at time also. I think a lot of things we touched upon, and I'm sure that in the audience we would have questions for you around that or online. What are the reflections around that being in the periphery?
I assure you, preparation for this was as active as this. We were as passionate as
Thank you so much. Honestly, this is a great way to start the day because I feel actually lively, like I want to jump up and things like that. So,
don't let us stop you.
I really enjoyed this talk. And actually, listening to you just reminded me of something. So I run an artist residency, but it was founded by Bessie Silva. It's called the Asika Art School. And we move across Africa. Our residency is a roving residency, but in a text that she wrote, she quoted the Kenyan writer Ngugi wa Thiong'o, and he says that knowing oneself and one's environment was the correct basis of absorbing the world. That there could never be only one center from which to view the world, but the different people in the world had their culture and environment as the center. The relevant question was therefore of how one center related to other centers. Right. Okay. And I think that that's really something that this kind of conversation brings to mind. So there are no peripheries, there are centers.
Perfect.
And where we all are or where we sit is the center. So thank you for that. And I have another little thing around Morocco. And so I'm based in West Africa. So to me, Morocco, you are my neighbor as Northwest. But the conversation is around the Arab world and the separation between North and South because of the Sahara has positioned a country in West Africa as neighbors with a country in the Middle East. And I feel like there's something around that we need to really grapple with.
Well, I think that's let's not forget which is something really that makes me really sick. It's a colonial heritage. The division, North Africa, sub-Saharan countries, West, East, and South Africa is not something that Africans decided. It's something that Europeans, when they were living in our countries, minding our minds, did to facilitate the language and the. You know how Africa was distributed between the Europeans? It was a rule and a pen, and it was like, okay, France will get this, Spain will get this, Portugal will get this, and that division of North-West is the way to organize that. What's sad is that today, that same organization really directs all the fundings and all the cooperation agreements. There is no way that Africans can all work together if not defined by North Africa, as in Morocco, Algeria, Tunis, and Libya, Egypt being considered in the Middle East, and then West Africa, South Africa, Central Africa, and it's not just geography, people, it's really the way administratively things work.
Actually, and that brings me to one question also. I mean, you're teaching, culture policy, and lots of people who go into the culture sector go in an arts management course these days or anything else. And I was wondering in which way what you're teaching is actually decolonized, and how are we in the West also more aware about what's happening?
So, two questions. One, a flag, like one of the citations for this section is a piece I wrote on decolonizing arts management curriculum. And one of the things I came away with was, you know, it needs to be more systemic than left to the individual lecturer. You know, I would say I still have ways to, I'm sure there are blind spots I have just by virtue of my own experience, but, you know, not every lecturer comes into the place having lived in 11 different countries, going, you know, north, south, peripheries, whatever. And so my approach to decolonial might be broader, but not even there, because I'm sure there are like linguistic issues. I'm like, yeah, do I have anything from the Arab world? What, you know? So it should be more like subjects decolonizing. It shouldn't be left to the individual lecturer. Just because you're nice doesn't mean you're decolonial, right? So let me add, right? So let me add, in terms of how I teach it. So, I mean, it's been a development. And as you were talking about the administrative divisions, one of the things I start with is we talk about cultural policy, and we have this term about implicit cultural policy, as in economic policy that is a cultural policy. Immigration policy, as we've talked a lot about, that in essence is a cultural policy, who gets to come, whatever. And I always put up the three maps, just to give an example, 3 maps of the African continent. First, African continent prior to 1880. It's the in European books it's the Berlin Congress. In Caribbean books it's the Berlin Scramble. You know, the division, and words mean things, right? So so you put the pre-1880 or 1880, I forget the term, thing where it's like, you know, Bantu people, Swahili speaking people, you know, and then you put when it's like divided upon European colonization, and then the modern day political structure. And I'm like, this is an example of one of the large, like one of the most macro example of implicit cultural policy. You know, the Berlin Scramble wasn't about how do we teach people our language or, you know, spread our culture. It was about who gets to economically ravish where. Right? But it's now become a thing where even to this day, in the modern, politically independent African continent, we still speak these languages. You know, the food is still there. I was talking about when I moved to India, all right, at the time I didn't speak any Hindi, whatever, but I did speak cricket because I'd also been colonized by the British. I did know what Horlicks digestive biscuits were, you know, so I had to explain that to like my Danish, no, this is Horlicks, because we've been colonized by the same people, and there were things that wasn't, all right, I don't know your quote-unquote indigenous culture, but I do know the British colonial culture, like that we can start, and that's a big cultural policy. So that's an example of just how I teach, like, you know, understand that the policies we have today are a product of the historic. So if, you know, even as cultural workers, when we're doing this kind of international work, whether regional or whatever, or however, we also need to actually, so it's responsibility to know the history of the relations that we're continuing.
Our respect.
Yeah. And be reflexive about it.
So
I hope that answers the question.
Knowing about the innovations and the differences. Back and forward, both things are so important.
Yeah, but I mean, and you know, it's not that I'm not hopeful, but I'm like, history has been embedded in so much. Like, as you say, we're like, oh, we don't really talk to you, but it's not because we don't like you. We just don't even have structures to talk to you.
In Morocco, young people don't speak French anymore. They speak bad English. They can't write this sentence they pronounce in English. They literally cannot write it. But it's a rejection, a total inherent to their cultural rejection of the French language. And they don't speak French. It's just like they're just like rapping in the street and speaking English and Arabic.
It's like yesterday they talked about Russian.
It's not that I don't like you as a French person. It's not that I don't like France. It's just that we have history. It's like an ex that you did not really break up with because you fight. It's just like, there's too much in there. Okay, we're kind of fed up. Let's try something else. I'm looking at the other side. Instead of looking at the Mediterranean, now I'm looking at the Atlantic. And I'm actually really quite impressed by how it influences the communication on the ministry and administrative level. The Ministry of Youth is today communicating only posting in English and Arabic, because he knows that the audience only wants English and Arabic. So this kind of, the cancel culture movement was really the, let's say the catalyst of ownership of, okay, I am accepting this, I choose what, and I choose who I want to be, and I choose where I want to go, and how do I want to shape my identity as an ex-colonized, not colonized anymore
It's
person.
an interesting thing what you were saying about centering.
Yeah,
you know,
no, well,
I just, what is me and how do I relate with the world?
You can ask questions.
Yeah, I wanted to add
so,
to
more
Oyinda.
questions indeed.
I wanted to add to Oyinda to say that
one here, one there.
Yeah, I wanted to add that, you know, also I realized that with the history, we also in this room have a responsibility to do something different. Like, you know, we're not, knowledge of it doesn't mean we're trapped by it.
Is this working? It's working, yes. Okay. I'm Matthew Covey from Thomas Dot in New York. First, an observation, Marwane. As many of you know, I spent a lot of my life traveling around to music conferences and festivals, educating, helping people understand the US visa process for artists and how to get into the US. Mostly in Europe, where dozens, if not hundreds of people show up at these to find out what it takes to get to America. I was invited a couple of years ago to go to Visa for Music and was very pleased to discover that when I got there and set up to do my dog and pony show, no one came, which I thought was kind of amazing and slightly depressing, but also fantastic. Kudos to Visa for Music for that culture. I also wanted to ask a question. As somebody who's been in the music industry in New York City for 30 years, the relationship between the center and the periphery, I feel like there's a dynamic here that hasn't been touched on, and that's the notion of gentrification in the center. Yeah. And the fact that I feel like my experience in the music sector has been people coming to the center, because nobody's actually from New York, and then leaving, whether it's going to Prague in 1991 or going to Berlin in 1991 or to Seattle or to Athens, Georgia, or now, to Lisbon. Everyone's always leaving to go somewhere where they can afford to do their art, and it's not the institutions remain, but the artists go elsewhere. And I think that as we think about the ways to connect the centers to the periphery, we also have to recognize that the artists are not always staying there. And I guess that's a question about even here in North Wales, when we're talking to the artists here, a lot of those artists are coming from somewhere else because they can find a house in Anglesey that they can build. And I'm just interested in that dynamic and if it's something that people would see as relevant to this conversation.
Maybe we can do back and forth. Thank you very much, Matthew, for the question. Very, very interesting about gentrification. Except it's a very white northern concept. My artists do not know what gentrification means, and even though they would want to jump on a plane and go to Lisbon to make the prices of prices higher, they don't have the visas, they don't have the access, and they don't know the concept of gentrification. So in Morocco, we kind of started, I used that word one time because concept store opened in a shady street, and I said, oh, ce quartier va se gentrifier. This neighborhood is gentrifying. And like people look at me like, WTF? So it's interesting though that the cities you mentioned are all on the north side of the planet. The concept of gentrification is really also linked to this ability and this liberty of movement and whatever passport you're holding. Between brackets, I'm super proud of us because we did not talk about visas at any point of this conversation this morning. Although we did about yesterday.
We did. I did.
But what I'm trying to say is And maybe this image of how young people in our countries and Europe can circulate can also explain a bit more what I'm saying. When you're 18 in Europe, in France, Italy, Spain, you can just, with your identity card, hump on a train and travel at least to 17 countries, right? So let's just take a step back to mindset. The fact that you are not able, but you know that you're able. I don't know if you sense the difference.
Potentiality.
The potential. You know you're able to move easily by simply going to a train station and booking a 17-country tour with your identity card. So you're 17 and you can do that. Now let's go to Tunisia or to Morocco and you're 17. And you want to do the same. You don't even know that on the other side of the Mediterranean they can. So even the concept of being mobile is not defined the same in our mindset. I only knew and I can only hold this type of conversation because I was privileged enough to do my master's degree in France. But if you're in Morocco, studied in Morocco, even though you have a higher education degree, there are some concepts about mobility and about trips and about access that your mind does not know, not because you're underprivileged, but because they're not supposed to, your country does not supposed to have access to that. Right. And that I feel gentrification is a concept that really gets close enough to this kind of concepts.
Then let me add nuance. So, completely agreed in Morocco or on the space of maybe the wider North African space. But in Jamaica, gentrification is an issue. What was interesting was one of the things we've had to convince our politicians is that it's not a good thing. Right? So here the whole others, they're like, you mean get rid of the poor artists and the rabble rousers and get like rich people in? Isn't that amazing? Isn't that a good thing? And you're like, no, that's not a good thing. Right? So first we have to convince them that this is not a good thing. So that tells you about how people see the classes that, you know. Then on the other hand, that's also a conversation about livelihood. Part of the reasons artists leave, and it's almost accepted that they can't afford it, why are we not paying our artists? You know? So there is also that concept of, which is why I'm very clear of, like, you know, in terms of the digitalization and whatever that has been happening, that digital performances should be paid so that they're able to stay there. So that's the second point. Third point is, I will note in the space of a cultural arts district, because this is, you know, the other things I study are very much like the industry. In terms of the cultural arts district, say, of Kingston Creative, where it's based in a location, one of the things we've done is, one of the reasons we had to convince the politicians that this is a bad thing is because we realized that particular issue of protection of housing, what they call it, stabilized rent, etc., that's something that's a government thing. Like, no matter with our best intentions as a cultural organization, we don't run space. And so we had to convince, because we're like, we can see that if, as the art district, which is in it's in, for those who listen to Bob Marley, you know Trenchtown, you know the song. You know, Trenchtown is a poor part of the city, etc. But if Trenchtown becomes beautiful, everybody's going to want to live in Trenchtown, and the people who are in Trenchtown can no longer afford Trenchtown. You know, so we've had to be like, okay, before it happens, can we, you know, have rent stabilization, sort out people's ownership, etc. And those are government things. So we've had to step out. I mean, we're arts and culture, but we literally, like, out of responsibility, no, we have to step to government, you know, which is not creative or whatever, because as a duty of care. So even in the spaces, like, you know, the issue is, it's not that arts and culture shouldn't strive. The issue is, so where are the protections for artists as people? You know, Republic has universal basic income as part of that, trying to get that done. So that's a question I throw out, livelihood issues, but also that for those issues, that's government. And so there's an advocacy duty of care for organizations. Well, I think so, yeah.
Thank you. We had other questions. I think here you had a question.
And then Isabel. Okay.
And Isabel also, you also? Also here, eh? Yeah. First, yeah.
Yeah, who first?
Here, yeah. Oh.
Okay, thank you. My name is Isabel. I'm a freelance cultural consultant.
Can you speak up?
Yep. Yes. So I'm Isabel. I'm a freelance cultural consultant, and I've worked also on different development programs in internationalization. And coming back, it's more a comment, but it's interesting when we're talking about a center and periphery, because what we've observed, so I'm speaking from a northern point of view, based in France, that actually the support programs that we're doing for internationalization is a lot about unlearning. We're doing a lot of unlearning for the cultural workers and artists. So it's about creating those skills, unlearning the way that international development has been taught in Europe, from my perspective. And so it's also about making the artists that we support decide which will be their center, which was touched upon yesterday. And it's also about deconstructing the subsidies for mobility that's coming from the cultural diplomacy or their agencies, because this is also a way of defining where the mobility is going. So, of course, we need those subsidies, but it's about deconstructing them and relating them to the real sense. So I feel that the word international is actually embeds a very strong relation to the notion of center and periphery. And maybe if we change that word, or anyways we question the way that we're using the word international, we might also succeed in creating better dialogue or diversity in the relation to periphery and center, since it's more about different localities, people that are dialoguing, than nations that are dialoguing.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we have, yeah. You also a question?
Hi, thank you so much. Nike Jonah, Pan-African Creative Exchange. I think it's so timely, because this is a conversation that has been part of my narrative for like the last 10 years. And I guess I just wanted to share something around a way of thinking about how we talk about innovation in the center and the periphery. And one of the frameworks that we used to use when I worked at the Arts Council England, and we were constantly looking at this peripheral and center, and one of the frameworks we used to sort of further explain it in relation to why diversity is key to excellence in the arts was the standpoint theory. And it comes out of 70s feminist literature. And what it just basically says is they've sort of got this drawing of a bowl, and the bottom of the bowl is the center. I think it's a bit like the ballroom and being in the balcony, and they talk about how those on the periphery may be marginalized in terms of their positionality, because they don't have the same access to power, but their overview is extremely comprehensive, because they're constantly looking and seeing where the gaps are, and seeing where the opportunities are, and often those on the periphery are marginal. There might be someone who's disabled working with somebody who's got another barrier. And what happens is the innovation and the most exciting things happen in those spaces.
Yeah, exactly.
Amen.
Exactly.
But what the centre often does, and we saw it all the time, and I think an example for me was the pop-up. So in England, there was a lot of city centres that were becoming sort of like empty. And to avoid getting heavy taxes, or actually you'd pay more in taxes if you left your shop empty, because they were trying to avoid these city centres becoming places that were with antisocial behaviour. So some artists got together and said, can we just pop up until you find someone to rent? And so they pop up. Somebody in the centre sees it and goes, oh, I'm going to call it pop-up shop. And next thing you know, they're hearing their own ideas back to them, but packaged slightly differently.
Marketed.
Marketed very nicely. And I think there's got to be structures that kind of like protect that, because we constantly see that. And I think I was talking to one of my panellists, I'm on the panel later, about a very well-known, an academic that I like very much, finding out that he's ripping off people that he's connecting with, those people that are in the peripheries. And I often think, and it's interesting, I was working with a German composer, artistic director in a contemporary music group who said, but I don't want to be in the centre. I want to be up here.
Exactly.
And I said, well, you're in contemporary music, contemporary classical music. You're not quite in the centre, but you're certainly not up here. That's all I wanted to offer.
Thank you.
So I think the question, perhaps the question around centres and peripheries, it's actually not about centres and peripheries, it's about multiplicity of centres and this diversity that is there, but allowing and giving the conditions for this, to flourish, with the flexibility, the adaptability, and the empathy also of that learning and unlearning space. So thanks so much for this.
I think the two connect a lot.
Absolutely.
The unlearning and then the recognition of the necessity of a wider perspective that comes from when you're in a periphery.
And also the unpacking, what do things mean, like gentrification. So I think, a good learning space.
And let's not forget that at the end, center and periphery for the artists is majorly linked to livelihood.
Yes.
There are no artists that want to go to the center because it's the center. It's because they've consumed the periphery and they just want to be able to pay their bills.
They just want to be
livelihood.
An artist.
Yes, livelihood.
Voila.
Thanks so much.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks everybody also
Thank you, everyone.
And keep learning and unlearning together.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. A big thank you to Katelijn, to Marwane, and Kim Mary for this rich conversation. And I love the idea that we threw many new words in our conversation. So we keep adding and building. So we have a small break now. So we have half an hour, and we will reconvene in this room, but also online. During this break, if you need to check any departure information, you can go at the front desk here in Gallery. You have tea, coffee, some sugar, some candy, something to...
sgwennu'r holl gan ei osod. Does dim rhaid i ddod mewn cariad am unrhyw eiliad. Clarity just confuses me. The lines drawn on the map are strange assembly. when there's northerners and southerners, and westenders and eastenders, and sunny days in January, left spaces in my diary. But the demons ever need to know what the demons ever got to see as we fall in the night of light. Stay in touch, not far away, 'cause the demons ever need to know what the demons ever got to see as we fall in the night of light. Stay in touch, not far away, 'cause I know that apathy only ruined me, hanging around waiting for calamity. And by the earth a million, our skins will be vermilion. I own a dark but memory, so I forget any felony. But the demons ever need to know what the demons ever got to see as we fall in the night of light. Stay in touch, now far away, what the demons ever need to know La
Okay, we are about to start. That's fantastic. We are about to continue the forum. Welcome, welcome. Grab a seat. Make yourself comfortable for this new panel discussion that is about to start. So, welcome again to the Cultural Mobility Forum 2024 for our followers and listeners joining us online. We reached the fourth panel discussion as part of our forum. So this is a final discussion, and I'm sure it will be another very interesting one. My name is Johan Flock. I'm the Director of Operations at On The Move, the international network dedicated to artistic and cultural mobility. You are here at the Cultural Mobility Forum, generously supported by the European Commission, Wellsource International, and our colleagues from the British Council. So today, already we had a first panel full of energy, full of ideas, of exposing us to a diversity of viewpoints. And I love the political dimension of these conversations. It is interesting that when talking about learning, we are always talking also about unlearning. And I value the fact that we welcome very different viewpoints and tackle issues that are very close to our heart. So we are passionate about them. And I like the passion. I like to hear that. For this next panel, we are, continuing to follow this dramaturgy and going more and more towards skills, competences, knowledge, expertise. Not only where it is and where we can find it, or them, but more and more what we feel will be useful in the future. So this fourth panel is entitled Future International Collaborations, Future Skills and Future Standards. That's, an ambitious title. But for this panel and to lead the conversation, we've invited very dear colleagues from Italy, Giuliana, Ciancio, and Carlotta Garlanda. These two experts, cultural managers, researchers, have founded Living in Italy, an agency that supports the development of stakeholders, producers, cultural managers, and artists developing their international trajectory, mostly from the performing arts field. Both of them have accumulated an enormous amount of knowledge and lived experience managing projects, managing training, but also researching and writing about arts and culture, and this very particular international dimension that we investigate collectively today. So, very happy to welcome you and to leave you the floor.
Thank you, Jon. Is it working? Okay, perfect. Yes. So thank you very much, Jon. This is Giuliana, and I'm a white woman. I'm in my early 50s with brown hairs, green eyes, and I'm wearing a jeans and a black sweater. And so thank you, Johan, for this very challenging topic that we are here tackling together with these amazing speakers and together my beloved colleague Carlotta. So actually, to start with, we thought to frame this topic firstly in trying to give some very brief definitions about what does it mean when we try to think about the future. So, and we thought to look at, some examples of the literature around the social movements. And what they say, some of them was saying is that when we think about the future, the attempt to look at the future is an imaginative effort. So let's say that imagination was one of the key words that we have heard a lot and is really used a lot over these days. And to some extent, imagination also implies to interrupt specific narratives and then in a way create new context or norms that are also nourished by our beliefs and our values. So let's say that while we project ourselves toward the future, it's there that we start changing our present. And it's there that, in a way, our future begins. So this was a first topic that we were thinking. But so the question is, what is our present? And in a way, as it was arising in these discussions today, but as we all know very well, we are in a context of systemic crisis that is environmental, cultural, political, social, where we are really exposed on different intensities of inequities and power asymmetries that were already highlighted very well even before. But on top of that, what we thought that could be also interesting to share before launching the questions to our speakers is the fact that our present seems to be characterized by a sort of global burnout. And again, burnout was another keyword that was emerging in our discussion. But for us, what it's interesting is to highlight that the fact of a global burnout stands for maybe consciously or sometimes unconsciously to attribute feelings that are coming from this systemic crisis as individual crises. And this is appearing more and more really dangerous where we think about the future and our imaginative efforts. And so the result is that fear or rage or depression are taking a center stage and in a way enriching the function of this, let's say, homogeneous social bubbles that are not communicating each other, but on the contrary, they are really based on forms of individual pain and playing their game in the frame of a form of illiberal neoliberalism that is really playing its game on there. So limiting our imagination and our efforts to create this new trajectory. So starting from here, my dear Carlotta. So what is the role of cultural cooperation? So which are the insights that we would like to share about that?
So thank you, Giuliana. Hello, everyone. So I'm Carlotta. I'm a white woman in her 40s. I have short and blonde hair, and I wear glasses, and I'm black dressed. I wear black clothes. So during this panel, our aim is really to delve into the role of international cooperation in shaping somehow the landscape, the global landscape that Giuliana is just briefly describing. So specifically, we would like to explore the skills and the standards, as Johan was mentioning before, necessary for future collaboration. But in fact, what do we mean by these two elements? So drawing inspiration from the discussion over the past 2 days and also from our own experiences as cultural workers, we would like to just put some inputs to spark and enrich our conversation. So firstly, we may consider the creation of an effective cooperative environment, one that embraces more horizontal and less hierarchical management models and the governance structures. This probably, we think so, we hope so, may contribute to foster an atmosphere conducive to more effective collaborations. So secondly, we touch upon the concept of a financial ecosystem. Yesterday, Wafa highlighted this in the first panel. This involves navigating diverse contexts and engaging with various stakeholders to cultivate our financial independence. So this in turn may also probably ensure the preservation of spaces for freedom of expression as well. So lastly, which is also a specific topic of this panel, we would also consider how soft skills such as emotional, cognitive, social skills, among the others, can help us in reorienting and enriching our practices and activities. So these are just few preliminary thoughts we would like to share, but of course we are eager to hear from our two speakers. So we will bring their unique perspectives and professional experiences to the table and to the conversation. And of course, we would like also to hear from all of you. So Giuliana, would you like to start to introducing our two guests?
Yes, with an enormous pleasure. So I'm here for introducing, first of all, Jonah, sorry. And she works in strategic development across the cultural and creative industries worldwide. And she is currently the co-executive director of the South Africa-based Pan-African Creative Exchange. Between 2017 and 2020, she was a visiting research fellow at the Royal Centre School of Speech and Drama, where she led her current research topic of Pan-African Performance Network. And Carlotta, would you like to proceed?
So Vânia Rodrigues co-directs the research platform Modes of Production, Performing Arts in Transition. At the Faculty of Arts and Humanities in Coimbra, in Portugal, she founded the postgraduate diploma in cultural management and sustainability, where she experiments and teaches co-ethical arts management. So now we can start with the first question, which is more about limitations in imagining our future and the future of collaboration. So the question in particular is, which are the standards that are limiting our imagination of the future? How are they impacting on professional development as well? Because this professional development is also one of the topics that we are reflecting on. So please, Nike, do you want to start?
Yes, thank you. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nike Jonah. I'm a black woman, middle-aged, hazel eyes, brown skin, green tie-dye, green and white tie-dye top with a black turtleneck underneath, black skirt, navy tights and green sneakers. Just to give the idea, I love green. What I think of this question, the thing that comes to mind is I'm always interested in what's not visible and how do we bring it out. And I've been really grappling with something, and I'm sure lots of you in the room, especially those of you who are freelancers, are grappling with this invisible labor or cognitive labor. It's often referred to, and often it's the research, the current research is always about the housewives doing all this work and not being valued. But what's interesting is when you look at different studies that are out there around cognitive labor, it's the arts has got one of the worst kind of reputations for this. And what does it look like? It looks like somebody inviting you to do something and you keep scrolling and scrolling and you get to the bottom and you think, oh, what's the payment? You're not getting paid. And we all do it. I've done it, and I've been more mindful of it since I left full-time employment. But I'm mindful that people feel uncomfortable to ask what's the fee or to negotiate a fee. It's almost become synonymous with we don't talk about money in the arts. I hear that a lot. Or artists don't like talking about money, and I think we need to move away from that. I think there's something about that cognitive labor that allows people who are in privileged spaces to be able to continue and to be able to take advantage of the opportunities that are out there, and people who aren't as privileged spaces to be able to say, well, actually, I can't do it all. And I think an example for me was when I left the Arts Council, there was a figure that has always stuck with me, because I did a lot of work around equality and diversity and how to ensure that those that are marginalized or minoritized get opportunities to participate or to be funded as artists or in the art sector in whatever way they wanted to be. And that 80% of your opportunities in the arts and cultural industries comes from your networks. It didn't mean much when I was at the Arts Council. When I left and I started applying for opportunities and jobs, I realized I left the Arts Council in 2012, so 14 years, right? I've only had one job. I've had one job where somebody was looking through a magazine, I was on a selection panel, and they said, oh, I wonder if she's Nigerian, and I wonder if she'll come and speak to the black students at the Royal College of Arts. That's it, £150. I've had lots of opportunities, and I started to think about how do we get our opportunities, and what does that mean when all your opportunities are coming through your networks? And then the networks are reaching out to you and not always offering a fee or some kind of remuneration. I think we can do better. We talk and we fight for others. We don't always fight for ourselves. And if anyone's had to ever engage with a lawyer, you expect to pay. You expect to go in, meet with them. They might say, we'll charge you £100 consultation. We don't do that in the arts. Now, before lockdown, I was talking to the prison service, and they wanted to look at their diversity practices, but using theatrical techniques. Every meeting we had with the lady, she paid us. She said it's £98.56 an hour. And my colleague and I were trying our hardest not to laugh, because we thought, what, you're paying us just to chat to you? Even our own mindset is encouraging that. But she said, no, I believe you're sharing wisdom, you're helping me formulate the brief, and for that, I think you should be paid. And I said, we so don't do that in the arts, and we're not complaining, we're just saying that actually we need to think about these things more deeply and more meaningfully, because it doesn't progress us. It doesn't allow us to develop ourselves if you're constantly worrying about money. And I think when I really started to push back is 1 month, I'd worked out that I'd spent £200 of my own money and I was broke. And I kept being asked to do all these things. And I said to somebody, if you want diversity in the room, because you're asking me to be on the panel, because I represent diversity to you, you have to think about what is the offer. And you can't just, most of the people on the panel are working in institutions where the institutions expect them to go out and be doing these panels, selection panels, that sort of thing. But I'm a freelancer. How are you going to ensure that I'm okay? And I said, and I want you to think about this, not just for me, but for anybody else who's on the panel, and going forward in the future. You're a big organization, you should be able to do it. And she came back and she said, yeah, we're going to pay. And she paid a very decent rate. And then all the freelancers on the committee got paid. And I started to stick up for myself and ask. Because sometimes you think if you ask, that they'll say no and they can't afford it. But there's always a space for negotiation, isn't there? Even if you want to get paid, £350 for a panel, if they've only got 50 quid, they'll say, look, this is what we've got, but this is what we can do. And then you start a negotiation that way. And I'm kind of picking up on some of what Wafa was saying. I think there isn't just, for me, it's not always about money. Sometimes it's about opening up doors. Sometimes it's about advocacy. It's about those things that sometimes people in this space will have power and they don't realize that by them sending out a note to somebody saying, meet with Nick here, she's good at this, this, and this, it saves me hours and hours of filling out forms or networking and things like that. So it's about people also recognizing what power they have in these spaces. So even if you know you can't pay someone, I think then there's got to be other ways to remunerate. It doesn't have to be immediate. Like for our showcase platform, we're running on a very, very tight budget. What we'll do is if we get offered to something, like Marwane talked earlier this morning that he was at Massa. We were invited to Massa, but we were both of us were going to be elsewhere. So we said, can we offer somebody else up that's part of our PACE family, our PACE community? And we were able to support somebody else going to Massa who hadn't been offered the opportunity, who lives on the continent, who's done an enormous amount of work for us for free, and about us really thinking about when an opportunity comes, don't let it out the door without thinking about who you could pass it on to, especially if you've had people in your space that have offered support and guidance and advice, and it could benefit from that. So I guess, for me, I kind of feel like in the arts, we need to think about that, not just in terms of our own spaces, but what does it look like when you're going outside of your space, where it's much harder for somebody, particularly on the continent, to ask certain things because they just feel like they've always presented as they're always asking or they're always begging in a particular way. So to always be thinking about, be mindful of how these things present to them. I'm doing a project with British Council in South Africa, and I'd asked some people to share some aspects of working in the disability space. We were offering £150 for like a 10-minute video, just record a video. And the feedback, the pushback was, oh, you need to learn to pay more. And I'm like, it's coming from the Africa space, and that's quite a good fee for a 10-minute video. They're not asking you to be there, they're just saying, record the video, send it to us, and we'll share it as part of the Zoom information session. So to remember that sometimes certain communities cannot afford to pay, but they can offer, and they can be very rewarding in other ways. So I guess I'll stop there, but I did want us to kind of like think about that invisible space of labour that doesn't get valued. It's the labour that you do before you write, before you've even finished writing a funding application that's taken you 2 weeks, and everyone's had to do it for free, and you don't even know if you're going to get the funding. It's all of that labour. It's all the conversations you have before you get the partners together. It's all of that work that gets done that doesn't often get valued in the application, but there's also people that are a part of that don't get valued. They don't get named. It's the artist and the producer and maybe the artistic director, but there's a whole bunch of other people that don't often get valued or named in these spaces.
Thank you, Nike. Thank you very much. So this topic of invisible labor and cognitive labor, I think that needs to be explored more during our conversation, but of course it's at the basis on what can be a limitation for thinking about the future when it's really underestimated or not really treated as a key topic. So it's, but so Vânia, what's your point about these limitations for international collaboration, thinking about the future?
Thank you. So I should describe myself. I'm a 45-year-old woman with short brown hair and wearing jeans and everything red. So red earrings, red jacket, red scarf. Yes, I was asked not to moan, but then the question is about limitations and future. So it's hard not to moan. I think a quick way to answer your question about what limits my capacity to imagine the future would be, it would be the famous difficulty of imagining the end of capitalism. Sorry. Or at least its structural transformation into something worth fighting for. So just to keep it simple, and if I had one sentence, I would say, I'm a human being having a hard time thinking beyond capitalist structures, and I always go back to that. But I realize you want more than one sentence. So I might say and admit that my perspective is nowadays limited by a feeling of helplessness because of the many polycrises, but more recently also because of my research more focused on the ecological crisis. But I think my perspective is maybe not limited, but has expanded a bit too much. Meaning that for a long time, and I was presented here as a researcher, which is a recent identity to me, but for the most part of my life, I was a professional arts manager working in the performing arts, and especially in theater. And for most of my professional life, being an arts manager was about accumulating miles and countries and achieving things, not questioning them, or at least not at the same time. I was not supposed to make the kind of questions that we have been making together for these 2 days. I was supposed to get programmers' asses into rooms, phone calls to book shows. So my professional development and the way I was trained to imagine the future was, let's accumulate success. And for a Portuguese person, success meant becoming European, because we were taught that we were not truly European. Okay, we are an ex-colonizer, very small country. So going to France is still the marker of success for a Portuguese artist, for a Portuguese, in Portugal cultural policy. If you look, for instance, and the merit is all theirs, I don't want to take the merit out of them, but for instance, for us, there are 2 Portuguese well-known artists that are now in prestige locations in the arts field. One of them is Tiago, they're both named Tiago. One of them is the director of the Biennale de Danse de Lyon, and the other one is the first ever non-French director of the Festival d'Avignon. They have their own merit, but again, it's France. So what it means for a Portuguese professional to be successful is go to France, and you've made it. But then again, that was, going back to the limitations, that was my perspective all the way throughout my professional life. What's happened to me, and I guess to many of us, of all of us, is that that perspective has now expanded. Which means I second guess my options all the time. I've become suspicious of my desire to travel. So I get an email from you, and I don't say, great, I say, should I go? I'm reminded of, the awful notion and very stupid notion also of carbon footprint at every step. So it becomes difficult to imagine the future also, because capitalist narrative smiles right back at you. I mean, you go to the hotel and there's that little sign, did you know if you use your towel again, you will spare 18 liters of water? Fuck you. Look at nuclear plants and fossil fuel, etc. So, but this limits my capacity. I think these little signs everywhere you go. Think twice before you attend the Cultural Mobility Forum in person. This kind of threat on your networking, on your opportunities, on your professional development opportunities. For me, and I'm sorry if that seems too simplistic, it's just I feel less and less powerful and less confident in overcoming that kind of capitalist structure. So, yeah, that's partially that's moaning. So I'm sorry for that. But just as a second thought, and to maybe end on a bright note about you've asked about limitations, but also about imagination.
Yes.
And one of the things that I've been paying close attention to is that a lot of people are talking about how the ecological crisis is above all a crisis of imagination. And many people are calling our attention to the fact that we have really developed an issue with future thinking in terms of we're either thinking apocalyptic, so extinction narratives and films about the apocalypse, or sacrifice now. And those are both poor ways of invoking future temporality into our professional life and daily thinking. There might be something in between. But I think I avoid thinking about the future, to be really honest, in both my professional life and my professional life, because I'm a precarious worker, so you just get used to not thinking about the future. And in my personal life, because it gives me anxiety. And the fact that the images coming back at us of the future are images of, I don't know, aliens and green creatures and apocalypse. I mean, maybe we have a responsibility in imagining things that are not so far away from our present reality. So there's really a job for imagination. And again, just coming back to all this green transition buzz, I think one of the things that bothers me in all that buzz that is seemingly about the future, but it's not about the future at all, is that how focused it is on pragmatic, immediate actions. So they wave at you, this narrative, waves at you with the future, with the idea of saving the planet and saving the future, but actually all the actions proposed are immediate actions, are very pragmatical, practical actions. And the role of, that's not the kind of thinking we might be led to if we allow ourselves to imagine a different future. Maybe that's something that we need to pay attention to. As a last thought in terms of future, I'm trying to pick on the words you've chosen. So limitation, imagination, future, just to get the job done decently in this fragmented English. In terms of future, I have absolutely no answers or wisdom to share, but a good question, I think, that has been going around my head and that I'll be very happy to chat with everybody else if you have answers to this question is, how much should future influence cultural policy making? Meaning, if you are a cultural policy maker yourself or are in a position to influence cultural policy or advocate for changes in cultural policy, how much of your thinking is informed by the needs of present generations, meaning those that are born already, and how much of it is informed by the needs of the future generations who cannot speak because they haven't been born yet. And that, for me, kind of expands the temporality of cultural policies into a whole different horizon. So it's not about serving the needs of the living of ourselves, of the live of our counterparts, of existing artists, arts managers. It's thinking, what about in 50 years or in 60 years? But I'm not sure that's the job or the role of a cultural policy maker. I'm playing with the question in my head. Would it be different? Would it lead us to different decisions to think about those not yet born, bearing our responsibility towards them and not just the living? But that might be a very strange question to ask when so much of the living situation remains unanswered, as you were just saying. So again, I'm not sure I have the answer, but I think it's a good question to make us think about the future.
Thank you very much. But so, in a way, both of you are really addressing this fact that to imagine the future in a medium or long term, it's quite difficult. So you were speaking, for example, of the need of spaces of negotiations, while on the other hand, you were speaking about to expanding this idea of cultural policies in terms of new generations that are entering in, and again, also all the environmental crisis that is, of course, a political crisis first of all, and then also related to economy. But so how do you react? Because I saw that you were reacting while Vânia was speaking. So how do you see this discourse? Also connecting your thoughts with what you were saying about invisible labor and an expansion of policies.
I'm quite a hopeful person. I kind of like to think of the future. And so it's quite interesting to hear how Vânia talk about the anxiety that you're feeling. And I guess I feel it, but I think being black person that grew up in quite a racist part of Liverpool, not too far from here, I think I've always been in this space where just to get through the days or to manage my own mental health, I've always thought of ways of reimagining the future. I think it's that Afrofuturism that is a very, very popular subject. But I think recently I came across something called Afropresentism, which is about what is happening now, because we're always in this space of imagining a better future, and if you just hold on, you defer your gratification, and you'll have a nicer life later on. And actually, the presentism is actually about, what about now? So actually, as I was listening to you, I thought, different positionality. I think I've been on several journeys about my position in the world, whether I belong, whether I should be in the room, where I shouldn't, and I've had to negotiate that imposter syndrome. I held that for so many years at the Arts Council, just thinking I was going to be found out and be fired. And I joined the board of the European Cultural Foundation in 2012, and I'm chatty. People who know me know I'm quite chatty. I didn't say a word for a whole year. And then they came up to me and they said, we want you to be you. We don't want someone who's like us. We want you on the board because you're different and we want the truth about what we could do differently. And I said, are you sure? You really sure? You kind of want all of this? And they said, yes. And what was quite interesting is every time I'd make a point at the meeting, and sometimes I'd be the only one with a particular opinion, Princess Laurentine, the sister-in-law of the current king of the Netherlands, she was the president. She'd always come over to me and say, thank you for your opinions, and it was really good to have your perspective. And I noticed they would always kind of validate what I said. And then I also noticed that when most of the board would agree, they'd always look at me. I felt like I was a bit like the Simon Cowell of the board and say, well, what do you really think? Because they knew. And because I think I got to a place where I thought, my grandfather moved from the northern part of Nigeria at the turn of last century because they were poor and changed the name because they were Muslims and they wouldn't get work in Yoruba land. So that's Jonah is not our real name. We have a Muslim last name. And I thought he could never, ever imagine that his granddaughter would be sitting at this table. And then I felt this enormous weight. But then I thought, well, I should do something. If I'm here, I should just try to speak for people who aren't here and give my opinion. And sometimes I'm terrified, but I just try anyway. And sometimes I'm a bit clumsy, but I'll try anyway. And then bit by bit, I muddle through. And a lot of people in the space are incredibly generous. And they'll say, just do you. Because sometimes sometimes when people ask questions, they package it very nicely, and it seems like there's some kind of like rigor towards it. And sometimes I just blurt things out because I don't know what I'm trying to say because I haven't landed my point. And I think, given that I've just explained to you, and that I'm still invited to a number of different spaces, I feel not just hopeful for myself. I feel hopeful for a lot of marginal communities. I found a new language to help fight and sharpen people's understanding about how we can all be part of shifting things, even if it's only something small. It could be an invitation to something. It can be sharing information. So people who don't know me, I'm a very well-known networker and connector, and I get a lot of joy out of that. And I guess when I think about future possibilities, I think about a future where invisible are validated. I think about alternative realities. I've been doing a lot of work with this former colleague of mine from the Arts Council who's disabled, who's brought me into her world. I'm thinking about, well, what does that mean if we start to embrace disability? I mean, we did a project last year with, in South Africa, we did a project with a deaf Swedish artist. I had no idea what you have to go through to understand that space. So she speaks Swedish Sign Language. In South Africa, they speak South African Sign Language. And it just took us a minute to understand that not everything she was saying to us written was exactly what she meant, because her first language is Swedish Sign Language. And I remember maybe 4 months in, trying to find people in South Africa that spoke Swedish Sign Language, someone saying, the sign language interpreter can just interpret what they hear rather than trying to interpret her. They can interpret the speaking person, the speaking interpreter. And I went, okay, this is part of a journey. But realizing that there's an entire community of people who I had never considered, nearly 9 years at the Arts Council, ever. But where I guess I was hopeful is a few months later I went to a friend's wedding, and I think it's most probably the first social event I've ever been to where there was a sign language interpreter. I'd never been to a wedding or any christening or anything like that. And it's got me thinking, and I think things like that, where moments where I think, how can I do things differently? And everyone's going to be on those journeys. There's continuum, it doesn't stop. I think I'm now hopeful for my new ways of thinking, new ways of thinking through what an application would look like, how much more time you might need in an application process, because we have quite a lot of application processes, how you invite people in, how do you include them in a process where they feel that they don't belong, and what that might look like, what change needs to look like on our part. So I'm hopeful for alternative realities. I'm hopeful when I see things like the Me Too movement, because I think people are getting more of an understanding about what the challenges are. Some people have had these things happen to them, but they had no articulation until it came out. I'm hopeful with the Black Lives Matter movement, because so many people in my space would come and tell me the books they've read and what they wanted to expand their understanding and understand how they can use their privilege in more interesting and more impactful ways. So I guess I'm hopeful in those spaces. I'm hopeful around language. I think in the arts we can do better. Sometimes the language in the arts, I don't know what they're talking about. And people look at me and my family, I'm like, I don't know what that means. And I think we need to do better, because if we want people to really value the space of the arts and culture, people have to understand what we're talking about. And they don't need to feel like, like when you see a film of somebody being at an art gallery, they always have this way of behaving, like they start speaking in a particular way because they feel they have to be that way. They don't feel like they can bring their authentic selves into the spaces, and we need to do better to encourage that. And I'm not saying everyone in the room, but I know that in the arts, there is this perception from the outside that you have to speak about things that you don't really know what you're talking about, and it doesn't really always make sense. But we have to do better at explaining and wanting people to be closer to us and engaging with us in a multitude of ways, meeting people where they're at. I remember somebody saying that he works in a multitude of ways, and if people need him to go to their house at 8 o'clock at night, he will go to the house at 8 o'clock at night. He doesn't expect them to come to him. And I thought, really generous, but he does amazing work. So, yeah, I think for me, I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful when I look around the room. I'm hopeful when I've seen the panels and what I've heard people say. I'm hopeful when I hear the conversations. Because I don't know, I don't think I could, I don't think it would be good for me not to have hope and see that, because also I like to think I'm imparting hope to others, and we all help each other, because it can be scary. But I think the life that I grew up, especially early years in England, I was scared to go to school every day. I was scared to go home every day. I just didn't know what was going to be happening next. And then I think about where I'm at now and how I'm comfortable to be in these kind of spaces. That's where my hope comes from, is that I can see that things can change. Because if you'd said to me in 2009 that I would get up and speak in an audience, on a panel to an audience, I would have said you were crazy. So
I would like to stay here. Because yes, Carlotta, would you go?
I don't know if it works. Yeah, I just want to thank you a lot, and just a couple of words that resonates me somehow, because you were talking about alternative realities. I remember that you were already mentioning that when we met the first time, and somehow it also connected to what you say with this perception, expanded perception, no, somehow. And also, maybe it's also, I don't know, this idea of imagining, having hope and imagining possible other paths and other realities, and also answering to, as you said, imagining policy making for those who are not here right now. So, I mean, somehow it's the direction that I see as the possible, to give us possible answers to our panel when we say which can be concretely skills or concrete standards for the future. No? So this approach, it's a positive, somehow a positive approach and a very open approach. And I see a lot of similarities in this sense. So just to thank you a lot for this, because it's, I mean, somehow I think this is the direction that we wanted to stimulate, no, Giuliana? What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And really, thank you very much also, because hope it's a transformative feeling, no, at the end. And it's a political feeling in the sense that it's also, it's based on the fact that you create community when you share hope, and so you put a positive perspective. So, in fact, when we were discussing together, at the beginning we said, okay, so let's see the bad side of the coin, so and the other hand, let's see what does it mean the future. So how we can imagine future international collaborations, and so bringing together all these kind of feelings, which are, in a way, the elements that we really need to consider nowadays, according to the context in which we are performing, according to your specific perspectives, and so which are also some concrete tools, or also not necessarily concrete examples that you want to share when we are speaking about imagining the future in a sense, for, again, international collaborations. And so which are the conditions? I don't know, Vânia, would you start?
Yeah, I'm fully absorbing the role of the pessimistic bad cop in this conversation.
You were not pessimistic. You were not pessimistic.
I was
That's
a bit,
what I wanted to say.
By comparison, at least.
No, but you were not.
No, I mean, I do want to, I do believe in small acts of repair and transformation. But I believe them on a professional level, not on a political level. I have to be honest. There's no need for me to stand here and not be honest about it. So I believe in advances in our political atmosphere, in making demands to politicians, to cultural policy. Absolutely, absolutely. And I see hope there. But I don't see hope in discourses that are too confident on their ability to drive transformation. I'll give a concrete example just for you to maybe don't think that I'm a professional pessimist. For instance, I don't know if it's a language problem, but I do have an issue with sentences like arts and culture should champion environmental sustainability or green transition. So that's where I'm not that hopeful to think that such a fragile sector, a sector that's dealing with a number of issues that are outside the scope of this panel, but a lot of which you've touched upon, is the same sector who is going to be champion of stopping climate change or the degradation of the biosphere. I just don't buy it. And I refuse to be a part of that hopeful narrative. So just to make it clear, it's not, absolutely not, that I don't see hope. And I try, coming back to skills, I try to, when I teach arts management, I try to teach ways to hack the system for good. Yeah. And that's hope. Yeah. But it starts from a pessimistic standpoint. Meaning that the systems are hard to change. The struggle is going to be hard. You're going to find obstacles. And I have no problem in making that narrative a starting point to develop skills, because I know there's a lot of other narratives that are based on hope, on transformation, on a confidence on the impact of this sector, another word which I try to avoid resorting to. So I tried, it is not to belittle the small acts of transformation that we try to deliver in our everyday practice, but just to keep if you want to force future art managers in terms of skills and when they're training to zoom out of their bubbles and take the political context in consideration. So not to be too absorbed and too enthusiastic with their own capacity for transformation. And again, and I'm sorry just but that was kind of my promise to bring back to the question of environmental sustainability and how that hopeful narrative is permeating the sector. The way that some cultural institutions and networks are going about so happy and self-satisfied with their new eco label certification, blah, or their newly found obsession with whichever environmental metrics they choose, be the carbon calculator, etc. Those are transformations in the good direction, no questions asked. They're just irrelevant to what's at stake at the moment. And I think we shouldn't confuse the two, how do you say that, planes? Yeah. So there's one thing is, if you're directing, you're a leader of a museum or a theater, by all means, do engage with ecological transition, do assess where your practices are poor, both at ethical level, payment level, and ecological level. Just don't make the mistake of thinking that that's you having a seat at the big table where those decisions that could really impact what's at stake matter. I try to teach arts managers not to make that mistake. So not to be too much self-satisfied. Hopefully I've clarified where my pessimism comes from. Just to give a concrete example in terms of skills and the way I go about this is to, for instance, try to make them, and you have to think about the arts management curriculum. It's very action-oriented. So again, it's very confident. You have marketing, you have legal status, etc. Writing funding applications, fundraising, etc. It's all things where you have to be at your best. You go to a fundraising event, etc. And I try to be, the grain in the sand in that narrative and invite them to embrace uncertainty. How would you work with that in arts management? How would you not do a SWOT analysis or a calendar? What if your project planning is destroyed by a flood or a heat wave? These are very concrete situations, and they're not from Mars. They're from our lives. But you can teach arts management without referring to disruption. You can teach how to build a calendar, a project budget, without really assessing the dilemmas in the room. So, for instance, I still find that a lot of future and current day arts managers have difficulties in, for instance, making a grounded decision about how much to pay to artists of different nationalities. It's as simple as that. So it's not to brush the difficulties and put the question back at them. So how would you go about it? If you have a multicultural team, which everybody has nowadays, what's the rationale you're using? Is it the cost of living of the artist back home? Is it the cost of living of the artist? And these are questions that are typically not in arts management curriculum. You don't find them in syllabus. What you find is how to build a budget. It seems like universal knowledge. It's not. It's contextual knowledge, it's ethical knowledge, and sometimes it's knowledge that comes from dealing with the difficult stuff. And again, just to say capitalism 5 times in one panel, about becoming aware of where your practice intersects with a larger capitalist structure, and whether you want to do something about it or not, because it's totally okay that you don't want to do something about it. You want to play the system and play the rules of the game. That's fine. But that's kind of the way I go about using skills and skills training into this conversation.
Thank you. So, Nike, I see that you
I have this effect on you.
And you were changing your face, so I'm really curious to hear about you. What was moving you?
I guess what I'll respond to is kind of institutions. Obviously, there's institutions and there's individuals, and there's a lot of people in Africa, in the global south, in minoritized communities that don't go through institutions. They do their learning on the ground. And they learn about disasters, they learn about disruption because it's part of their everyday. So I think maybe part of training from institutions is about people being in these other environments. Because even from being in a city doing arts management to coming to a rural area is going to be very different. And I remember hearing, actually, the first time I came into the conference, it was in Wales, was in Cardiff at the Rural Touring Forum, and them talking to us what are the challenges of touring work. And sometimes it's not a hotel, and you go to a hotel, you stay in someone's house, and Charlie Dark, who's quite a famous DJ out of London, did his performance, was really excited by the questions that people asked him, because he said he was on a small stage in a church hall and people had taken the time to know who he was. But when he now went to the house, they called the police because you see this black guy's face looking through the window and they forgot he was the guy that was staying with them. So and they all sort of calmed down and it became part of the joke. But what was interesting is none of the black artists that I started working with at the Arts Council wanted to do rural touring, and then when they heard Charlie's feedback and other artists' feedback, they all said, we want to be in the rural space, because they felt like actually there was this sense of being appreciated. I think also to kind of touch on it is that there are those scholars and there are those arts people who've never gone through an arts institution, but they're just those kind of community-minded people who know how to get things done, and I wonder how those people integrate. I think responding to the point about what people get paid, I thought Reshape did a great job. There was a Reshape Europe project where we had people from all across Europe and the Med-South, and everyone got paid the exact same rate. And to be quite honest, it was a good rate for if you were living in the UK, but it was a fantastic rate if you were living in other parts of Europe and other parts of North Africa and Palestine at the time. So I thought that was a good approach. It made people feel valued. It made people feel like there wasn't a kind of imbalance or a hierarchy, because sometimes the hierarchy comes from England. I'm in these spaces constantly when I'm in continental Europe, and I feel like the English dominate. They do sometimes dominate the spaces. They dominate the narrative. They dominate the direction that it should go in. And sometimes it's quite hard to disrupt that because they're quite powerful voices in the room. So I liked kudos to Melitza and some of the other Reshape people. I thought what they did was brilliant. They really thought about these things and these questions about how you pay people and how you ensure that people feel valued. And I was in a meeting with another friend of mine who does a lot of work in Ghana, and this came up with British Council, and she said, I don't think the Africans, she's African, I don't think they should get paid the same as us, because, you know, it creates this imbalance and this expectation. And I said, what, an expectation to get paid properly, like more than £1 a day, come on, do you know what I mean? So I said to her, okay, you're getting paid $1,000 a day, you're good with that, right? And she's like, yeah. And I said, the Americans are getting 5. I choked. And I said, see, you don't like it, and why should it work any differently for you? And why should you accept a standard just because that's what's there right now? You know, and you feel that it's going to disrupt, it should disrupt, you know, because sometimes we go into these spaces, if you can afford more than the daily rate, you pay that. Somebody in Nigeria told me recently that they were asked to do a project and they saw that there was a particular fee put aside for them on the project, but the person who was managing the project gave them way, way less and expected a lot. And he found out about it, and in the middle he just said, until you pay what everybody else is getting paid, I stopped right there. And he said now when he does collaborations, international collaborations, he always asks to see the budget to make sure that if something has been put in for them, that they get that day rate. They don't get it chopped at, you know, about a tenth of what was put in the budget for them, because often people take advantage of that in these spaces where there's this hunger to kind of be part of this international space. So, yeah.
So thank you, and I think you were specifically answered to what Vânia was underlying, so with a concrete, very concrete situation, and also, which is not in the syllabus. So I'm sorry to interrupt this flux, because I think we have to open to the audience, but can we just take 1 second? Do you want to maybe, do you want to propose any question to the audience before collecting their comments?
I think even in this idea of future collaborations, also because it's an open topic, and there were emerging ideas or things that were really related to values, emotions, but also needs and practical needs. So, if you have questions on which you can react and vice versa, so because it's the end.
I would chuck it back to them and say, what do you think your limitations have been to future thinking? And what are your dream future, future sort of like thinking ideas?
What are your most dirty dreams? It's a safe space, allegedly.
Hello everyone, my name is Katie Carrigy-Watts. I work part-time on research and publications for On the Move, and I'm currently a part-time freelancer on the side of that. I wanted to share something and then ask a question that you might not have an answer to, but that there's a sort of tension, I think has been revealed between the perspective of Vânia and this perspective of Nike that I really feel lives in me, so I'm curious just to see if this resonates with you. So the first thing that I wanted to share is that we've been talking a lot about money and also about language and how that shapes how we think about things. And I just wanted to share very briefly, there's an American writer named Alexander Chee who has a wonderful saying that at least resonates with me, where he says that when he is in a process of negotiating the price for his work or a fee for something that he'll do, he thinks of money as an emotional boundary. Because he says that if he accepts something that he feels is too low, it will essentially create emotional problems in the relationship, basically. Questions of, that he will end up showing in that space being angry and resentful, and that's not how he wishes to show up as an artist and as a creative in the professional relationships that he has. So when he advocates for himself in a financial perspective, it's like the meaning behind that personal advocacy for himself is that kind of emotional boundary and trying to uphold a good relationship with the person that he's in professional relationship with. So I just wanted to share that because that came to mind hearing you guys talk, and I think both of you kind of commented on the fact that we need to have new language to talk about what we're doing and why we're doing it. And then the sort of question that I have and that I'd like to pose to the panel and to the people present here is that on the one hand, Nika, you talked about not having such a taboo in the industry about money, and especially for people who are freelancers or who consider themselves precarious workers, to be able to ask for more when you feel like that's an appropriate thing to do. And then on the other hand, Vânia, you talked about, you kind of opened the panel saying, I'm a human being having a hard time thinking beyond capitalism and that system and that society. And I feel both of those things very strongly. And I sometimes live with an emotional tension that I don't know if I can completely articulate, but that's somehow between like, like in the lives that we live today, money is important. It's an important indicator of value, and I do think that if you're in a precarious position, like one of the most empowering things you can do is ask for more and insist on getting concrete remuneration for the value that you're bringing to the table. And on the other hand, in a sort of bigger, longer term, more future-oriented perspective, I worry that opening myself up to that somehow also limits me into being more anchored in the capitalist system and a capitalist way of thinking. So it's not something that I feel like I've resolved. I just feel like there's a tension there that I'm still living with and trying to work through. So I'm just curious if you have any response to that.
I think in terms of the emotional connection to money, I agree with that. But I'm also not offended if someone comes and says they haven't got anything, or they've only got, somebody in Kenya said to me during lockdown, I've got $50 to pay you. And she was a bit embarrassed, and I said, well, I've done lots of gigs where I haven't got paid. I'm not saying no, but like, you know, and I think that emotional barrier of money can often get in the way. Some people have said to me, I deserve more, and therefore I'm not going to do it because I feel like I'm not being valued. I don't see it that way. I kind of look at the context where people are coming from. And if they're a student, or they're coming from a small company, or they're coming from a place where they haven't got much funding, I'll try and work with it. But I'll also work with other resource, intelligence, support, advocacy. I'll work with other resources that Wafa mentioned in her presentation yesterday, because I recognise that they also have a value. And sometimes I also work with delayed gratification, knowing that something might not come from them, but it will come from someone else, because I really believe in that things go around, what you put in comes back out. So I get that. And I guess, what was your other thing? You said about money. What was the second thing, sorry?
I said a lot of things.
Yeah.
I guess the tension between like financial self-advocacy in a system in which that's not always the easiest thing to do, and maybe worrying about the fact that that further embeds you in a form of capitalist thinking that you ultimately maybe want to escape.
But I also wonder if that wanting to escape is part of capitalism's trick to kind of keep us in our spaces and not being able to advance, because I hear it a lot with artists. When I came from America, the Americans are much better at asking for what they need. And I was so surprised that someone said to me, they did this logo and they said, I got 150 quid. And I goes, how many days did you work on that? And they said, about 2 weeks. And I said, I've come from advertising where people are getting $500,000. Okay, it was a FedEx logo, but I'm saying you've done all of this and actually you're not getting what you deserve. So I helped him. I said, these are the sort of things, go back and tell them this, this, and this, so you can get a better fee. So I find in certain parts of the world, America's very capitalistic. You land at the airport, you've got to find $1 to get a trolley, which I find a bit nuts. But I think there is, sometimes I feel that's a trap as well. Like when you start thinking about, if I'm getting too much into this capitalist space, then that kind of like tension, because you're not always getting what you need, and it comes out in other ways. You have to compensate in other ways, which also feeds capitalism. So I feel like it goes like this. It's quite a hard one to navigate. I don't feel the tension. I just feel the tension from people that I know need hard currency, because I'm in a space where a lot of people don't have the luxury to think about those tensions, because the reality is, can they pay the most basic stuff? And every time in the African space, they always say, before we get to the arts, we've got to get for the basic living standards. Yeah.
I don't have an answer for you. I mean, I feel you. We're trapped. I think the only maybe way I know of experimenting with a possible answer and being very cautious here is universal basic income. We need to test it. At least in Portugal, cultural policy is very traditional, very conventional, doesn't take risks, and only does something, again, as I said, after France has done it. So my only hope is that big countries, richer countries, compared to Portugal, which is a semi-periphery, start testing stuff out. Because in this system, I feel you, I feel the trap, I have no answer. So let's experiment with different ways of organizing, not the arts and culture, but society as a whole.
Mariette, you were...
Yes.
Thank you. And thank you to everybody today. It's like I think all of us want to jump up. And everybody's bubbling with resonance to so many things that were said also this morning. I just want to start with a couple of, let's say, vignettes or just little snapshots. A friend of mine once said to me, "I know who you are. You're a cynical optimist." And I really like this red, stop, and green, go. And I feel that Giuliana and Carlotta should be wearing yellow or something. But a couple of things come to mind. First of all, when I first started moving, let's say, from the arts towards human rights, I remember calling a friend of mine, a colleague, and saying, "It's so depressing, all this stuff is coming out, corruption and scandals and, horrible things in politics and censoring and stuff." And she was saying, "Yeah, isn't it great? It's coming out." And I'm also reminded of something, forgive my memory, but I read a paper by two feminist scholars some time ago who were talking about a certain word which they had retrieved from history, which is respair. And the paper is about the fact that that resistance comes from despair. And the third vignette, or if you like, or image, is that for me, this fact that you are, and the people this morning, and everybody, we're talking about how vulnerable we are. How many conferences have we been to when all the panelists said, "My association does this, we do that, we have this many of those, we have that many funders, we have that many audiences." And I think this fact that we're actually being humble and vulnerable and realizing that we don't know everything and knowing that we need each other is, a good thing. So if my cynical optimism is anything, it's that from this despair we can learn how to resist.
Thanks, Marwane.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Marianne.
Yes, it's very nice.
I don't know if there are other reactions or if you...
I would just say that the vulnerability allows everyone to face theirs. And that's always good for our mental health. Because sometimes you think you're the only one, and then you realize, oh, I feel exactly the same kind of thing. So I think that, for me, putting it out there is just to give other people who might feel a bit shy about it permission to go, it's all right, because a lot of us are feeling it anyway. And then that's about us also taking care of our mind health, which is important these days. Yeah.
Vânia, do you have something that you want to add?
No, I'm staying with that word. Respair, thank you for that.
Yeah. Okay. There are the last reactions, and so Johan, it's already giving me a sign.
Just a quick one, I think, to do with, the cultural policy that you were mentioning earlier, and maybe something hopeful within the Welsh context, maybe. Is up, yeah? Oh, sorry, yeah. Fadili Magia, Cardiff-based, around a creative agency called Watch Africa, and also an organization called Sub-Sahara Advisory Panel, which is a network of African communities in Wales. I just want to, it's more of a comment regarding the cultural policy issue that you mentioned earlier, and I think this is just more of a plug-in within Wales and the Welsh government, because there is a little bit of that future thinking approach that's been taking place, I think, over the years, and this is through the Future Generation Act,
I don't know if many of you are familiar with it, but certainly within Wales, around 2015, when we were having the SDGs coming through, Wales was thinking of these goals and what they meant to Welsh people and the future generations to come as well. So if anyone is not familiar, I think definitely urge them to look at the Future Generation Act. But I think in terms of the conversation around future possibilities, for me it's about privilege, really. It comes down to what's your reality and where are you today? Because for many people, their future is today or their future is tomorrow.
Yeah.
So they cannot imagine what's going to be like in a month or two. So there is that privilege aspect which we need to consider as we speak about this.
Yeah. Thank you very much. We really thank you very much, because it's also really about how to think about the future and future collaborations, and how much the present it's really an urgent matter for the elaborating dynamics. So I think that we have to close, and yeah, we wanna really thank you very
so
much
much.
for
Thank
sharing
you.
your deep thoughts and inspiring us. So yeah, I think that we can close, no?
Yes,
Carlotta?
we have to close.
We have to close.
Because Johan is watching. He's signing. So yes,
Okay.
thank you so much
So,
also
thank you
for
very
all the
much.
attention.
Cheers.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Carlotta, Vânia, Nike, Giuliana. It's always fantastic to have these voices, unfolding even the words we use, and always, trying to unpack all the connotations or the assumptions we make when we use these words. Please go and sit in the audience, join your colleagues, while I'm about to close this forum already. It feels we just started. There is a feeling of frustration that we touch on many topics, and still a lot of conversation could happen. I just want to make sure with my colleagues that from our online participants we didn't get burning questions that we missed. No, everything under control. Thank you so much. So look, this morning we had another journey, and I feel if I can share a couple of takeaways or thoughts. I feel that yesterday the motto was the international is where you are, and today probably the center is where you are. So yesterday conversation was really all about acknowledging that this international dimension that we try to grasp and penetrate is really next to us and constantly surrounding us, not only because of the media or social media or opportunities and colleagues moving around with us or around us, but also because I would say this internationalization or globalization is so embedded in our daily life, our way of thinking, even if the boundaries and the frontiers and the gates are not always open. And this is something that we also heard a lot this morning. The gates of the imagination are not always open, and the way we project ourselves is not always easy. We need to deal with the present and all the emergencies of the present to be able to project ourselves and to decide collectively what kind of future we want to do. If I pick up some of the words or comments we heard that really will stick with me, apart from the cassette ninjas that I love, the idea that the routes we built or the routes we used are sometimes not yet built and usable. So the idea of the centers and the peripheries really need to we need to spend more time in trying to create the routes between the different centers or the different peripheries. What I also keep in mind is the amazing entrepreneurship spirit that lies in the so-called peripheries. Peripheries meaning vulnerable groups, but also geographical peripheries. And this resilience aspect, and I love the idea that innovation is another word for resilience, really we feel the bubbles. I don't know how to say that in proper English, and hopefully you understand me. What also stick to me is this idea of progress. The entire forum is around the question of departure and arrival, and the notion of growth that might not be always economic, but also individual, philosophical, artistic. And I wonder if our learning journey is all about the idea we have of progress, how individually or professionally we want to progress, in what kind of direction, and where do we want to progress? So what is the landing mark we want to reach? And these are one of the many questions I will also keep in mind. In our ability to imagine, precarity plays a big part, and access to resources. And it feels sad that we need to always go back to this, resources, funding, where the money comes from. But also, these questions help us to reshape the trajectory itself. What are the success indicators that we want to use? What do we collectively define as success? And then a last thing that connect this forum with the 2023 edition and the words of Ukona Mlandu, the arts writer and curator from South Africa that we had the chance to invite. She was always asking, who is this we are talking about? And across the conversation, I felt sometimes there were many different we's in the room. But these we's shared a lot, actually. A lot of ambitions, a lot of goodwill, and that we could feel voices from, let's call them the global north, willing to learn from so-called or perceived peripheries or the global south, whatever we want to call alternative places and context we don't always interact with. I feel we are heading in the right direction, asking ourselves all these questions. So I want to finish with this, more questions. And that's it. I'm afraid this is the only very personal, top of my brain takeaways I want to share now. And I'm sure everybody will go with more takeaways. So, this is the moment of the day where I'm going to start to thank 1 million people, But before thanking 1 million people, I would like to call Dace, if Dace you want to come next to me. I want to call Dace Rezele from... Do you... I want to call Dace because Dace has an announcement to make, and I really want all the people following us online to hear this announcement.
Thank you, Johan. So very kind. But before the announcement, I would like to thanks really to you and to Marie to create this safe space for these interesting discussions that everyone could interact with each other, and we are had lots of things to share, and we acquired very many new friends and information. So, and I wish as well to thanks to our hosts. Thank you very much. I felt really spoiled during these days. So, and I think it sets really high expectations. So, and here is the announcement for the next year's forum that will take place in Riga. So these dates are already set in our agenda. So this is from 28th to 30th of April. And the forum will be co-organized together, so on the Move and the Northern Dimension Partnership on Culture. So everyone is warmly welcomed, and yeah, see you in Riga next year, exactly the same time. So thank you.
Thank you. So you heard it first here. There will be a 2024 edition of the forum. We will be continuing to investigate cultural mobility issues, and it will be a wonderful Riga, again with wonderful partners. So now, the moment we're all waiting is the thank you time, but this is a very special thank you time. So first, I will thank On The Move team members, Marie Le Sourd, who is here and will join me. We have Bernardo Queiroz over there, Katie Carigi-Watts just here. So I want to thank them very much. And I want them to come next to me, because now I'm going to call everybody from Wells House International to come, as they deserve a massive applause for their help and support in organizing this event. So please, Zeli, Nikki, Vicky, Eleanor. So they're all hiding behind me, but you know, you will see them, and you've seen them already, and some are still, you know, at the front desk waiting for you to come up.